Intense day at ETHDenver, powered by Near Intense. I'm your co-host today, Andy.
What's up, guys? I'm Robbie.
We'll be,
let's go. Get
we'll
the
be-
energy up. Come
we'll
on.
be emceeing the event. Let's go. If you guys don't know us, we run a media platform called the Rollup. We do a lot of live streams, conferences, etc. So check us out on YouTube, Twitter, etc. We have a big rumor mill firing this week, as always. But we're here today to talk about Intense and the rise of intent-based architectures in the blockchain ecosystem.
I mean, first, shout out to Near for building in the space. We've got an AI show powered by Near. It's called AI Supercycle. We've been doing it for going on about 5 or 6 months now. We've had a ton of awesome guests, really smart guys that have come on, talked to us about OpenClaw, AI agents, agentic payments. A lot of those concepts are going to weave together here today with Intense.
Definitely.
We've kind of seen the interop space evolve over the last few years. Intense are the end game.
Yeah.
So we're going to be talking about it.
Yeah, I think the intent-based architecture has certainly won the likes of a lot of the technical folks. We've actually got a robot today. Bring him up here. Yeah.
He's got boxing gloves
He's got
on.
boxing gloves. He's ready to fight. He's got a Near Intense hat on. He's ready to go.
Let's go.
We're living in the future here in Denver today.
It's right here.
So
don't mess with this guy. He's got the boxing gloves on for a reason.
Very soon you're going to be able to pay this guy with Intense cross-chain to fight you or your dog or your child or train you in your boxing career.
He's not just a boxer. He's a financial advisor. He's your lawyer. He's your doctor. He's everything you want him to be and more. Just befriend.
I think for right now, all of us in this room could totally destroy this robot, but I think within 12 months, that might be a different case.
Yeah, he's a little bit short, but he's got the beanie on. He's got the boxing gloves. So we're glad that he's with us here today.
Oh,
he's losing his balance a little bit.
He's going to sit down. Guys, we have an awesome first fireside chat. We've got Alex Shevchenko, the pioneer of Near Intense. As we spoke about earlier, Intense have really become the primary cross-chain infrastructure for transferring assets and really just unifying the entire space. Alex is an expert in this field and will give us kind of a lay of the land to start off. So guys, without further ado, please welcome up Alex Shevchenko to the stage for the fireside hosted by Robbie. Guys, give him a round of applause.
So it's not Alex's first time on the show. He's been on several times. Intense Day that we did online, as well as several roll-up appearances. I think it is, usually you have your cat with you, in your room when you come on the show. This time we have a robot, so a little bit different today.
Yeah, a little bit different, but that's okay. When I'm at home, obviously, everybody are able to see my cat.
Well, we've seen the space move so quickly. You've been at Near building the Intense protocol from the ground up. Why don't you just give us a sense, set the stage for us here today. We're going to be talking about Intense for quite a while. We've come to believe that Intense is the end game after mint and burn bridges. Remember when bridges had $4 billion of hacks? We're kind of past those days. Now we have Intense, which seems to be the apex of navigating cross-chain on blockchains. Just give us a sense of how you've seen things evolve and your reaction to how much adoption Intense have gotten thus far.
So I have been building different solutions in interop for many, many years. Have seen different versions of use cases that these cross-chain interop solutions are presenting. I would tend to agree with Hasib from Dragonfly, who was talking with you guys, and he was saying this thing that people want to have the actual asset. If I would like to own Bitcoin, I don't want to own CB, BTC, WBTC, or whatever Solana version of Bitcoin that is there. I would like to have the actual asset. Why? Just because if I'm storing it for a long period of time, I don't want to get exposed to the risk of whoever wraps it, because who knows what is going to happen with this provider, right? Maybe some providers are more stable, like Coinbase, but maybe some other providers are not that good. So if I'm storing assets, especially spot assets, for a longer period of time, I want to have the actual exposure to the assets. which means that wrapped versions is not the answer to this. That's the one thing. And on the other hand, I think we can like very easily say that we are living in the multi-chain world, and that's why people need to have assets on different chains. And at the moment, it is extremely complicated to take care of it. Like different wallets, you need to manage different seed phrases. Some tools are supported, others are not supported. If you're a user of Phantom, how can you store, you can store assets from Solana, Sui, ETH, and if I have some Tron liquidity, how about Tron? Now I need to have a separate wallet there. If I'm a user of Stellar, if I'm a user of Cardano, again, something different. So this approach should be changed. Self-custody is good. That's a core value of the blockchain vertical. But with the maxis of self-custody, like we are not doing a very good job in comparison with the custodial solutions like Binance, where you're having your account in Binance and you have all of the assets directly in there, right? It is very convenient. That's why many people are saying that, yeah, they have some crypto, but never ever have left the centralized exchange. So our point here that let's simplify this experience. Let's make sure that the way how we are designing user experience for everybody is very simple, straightforward. It is not requiring many complicated things. And this is where intents are getting into. And this is like an ideology how you should develop user experiences and products in general.
Building on your point that people want the actual asset, they don't want wrapped assets, which was a result of all of the fragmentation that we saw in the bridge space from the mint and burn types of bridges. This might catch some people off guard, but there's kind of been talk that there's more than 21 million Bitcoin out there. And the reason, you probably know where I'm going with this, the reason is because there's all kinds of derivative products. You've got strategy, you've got options products. All of this is diluting the supply of Bitcoin. These are all wrapped versions of the actual spot asset. And I can't help but think, maybe if all of the capital was flowing into the actual spot asset, we wouldn't, maybe we would be a little bit higher than we are today rather than flowing into derivatives. I think a lot of that has been driven by so much speculation, so much hype around some of these derivatives products. You guys have seen billions of dollars in flows through near intents. So it has significant product market fit. Yeah, I think that deserves a round of applause. $10 billion.
I think it's actually closer to 15 right now already, but
I checked last week it was 10 billion. Now it's 15.
Things moving fast.
Things truly are moving fast. And so I wanted to get your reaction to how much of this do you think is sticky liquidity? How much do you think, despite everyone seeing prices, we know where things are. Obviously, we still have people in the room today that are very excited about intents and building in the space. How much of this is sticky product market fit versus mercenary capital chasing narratives?
Yeah, so from my point of view, like different crypto users are on a scale what is okay for them and what is not. There are crypto maxis that never ever gonna use centralized exchanges, and there are people who are okay with this, right? Everybody is deciding for themselves. What near intents is given to everyone is an additional option, right? So up until now, it was only like the way how you are able to do cross-chain swaps was only focused with a good user experience, was only on the centralized exchanges. Near intents gives you a very good experience, but you can't do this in a decentralized manner. So this is just an option. So I do believe that right now what we're seeing is a very, very early adopters who are starting to use this technology and starting to become familiar with this. And here is a very simple observation for this that supports this point. The global cross-chain market for the decentralized solutions, many of which are more centralized than near intents, this market is approximately 200 to 500 millions in volume per day. And if you're going to open CoinMarketCap and you're going to open Cardano trading volume, it is going to be 2 billion per day. Only Cardano. which means that this volume mostly is served by the centralized entities. So imagine what is the volume for Bitcoin, for Stellar, for many other things. Where is this volume happening? And the answer is mainly on the centralized venues, right? So if decentralized solutions can match user experience of Binance, if we are able to create a Binance 2.0 that is like easily usable for everyone, when people are not gonna contemplate about thinking about gas, thinking about nonsense, stuck transactions, different wallets, when we're gonna remove all of these barriers, I think we're gonna to see the rise of people who are moving from the centralized exchanges to the decentralized solutions in order to manage and balance their risks that these two solutions are providing. So I think we are very, very early within this, and kind of like it is sexist game to lose, because like you cannot go down from 500 billion in comparison with Cardano trading volume, right? So it means that this thing is only going to go up.
There is a Binance 2.0, and its name is Hyperliquid. And we're seeing no, not a Hyperliquid bull.
No. It's the name of Binance 2.0 is Near Intense, right? So
Yes. Okay. So I think, it's Coinbase's game to lose, right? It's Binance's game to lose, and either way, we're bringing more of this financial ecosystem on chain, slowly but surely. First, it's making its way through, albeit more centralized alternatives that have 4 validators and are completely decentralized, and then ultimately you will reach the end game where a lot of these things are traded through intent. They're actual spot assets. It's not paper derivatives or perps. But the trend is clear. These things are moving on chain. I wanted to get your read on something that we didn't talk about in our last chat, which is another secular bull market that we're seeing happening outside of, maybe if you look at CoinMarketCap. We're seeing a lot of institutional capital flow into crypto, DeFi, this space. BlackRock went, partnered with Uniswap, bought some Uni tokens for their BUIDL product. Apollo went, partnered with Morpho. It seems to me that this is almost creating like an asset-centric view of the world. It used to be that, every chain had a DEX and it had a lending market. Now, you're looking at the asset. The asset has an exchange. The asset has a lend to borrow. When we're moving and creating more of this institutionalized DeFi ecosystem on chain, how much do you think we're creating these silos, this permission DeFi ecosystem versus another narrative that we're hearing a lot about today has been synchronous composability, which I think Intense plays a much closer role into rather than creating these silos. I'm just curious from your perspective, being, on the ground building this, how do we overcome some of the permissioned aspects? They're not so much at the chain layer, now they're at the asset layer. How do we make sure that these assets, these high quality RWA assets, are composable with the rest of DeFi?
okay, give me just 1 minute before we are going to go into the composability question. I would like to wrap up really quickly the centralized exchanges versus decentralized then. I would like everybody to understand me correctly. I'm not against centralized exchanges. If you would take a look at, for example, at FTX, from one side you can say, "Oh my God, this is scam. Like, this is really, really bad." From the other standpoint, the guy went to prison, which means that the liabilities were converted into the punishment. What happened with the multi-chain bridge? Who is the founder? Where is this person? The attack was 180 million, right? And these are lost funds. So from that standpoint, what I want to say is that decentralized solutions just provide different set of risks and different set of exposure. And through having different solutions, now people are finally will be able to manage these risks. And this is an important thing. So I would like everybody to understand this, right? We are not against centralized solutions. We're just an alternative to them.
They like to say if FTX was on chain, it would have never happened.
Well, potentially.
We would have known that. We would have known.
Yeah, or maybe it is going to happen. We would know the next block when it happened, and then we don't know who is the mastermind behind it, and then the guy would still continue living in Bahamas, right? So now coming to the composability, cross-chain is inherently asynchronous. Like blocks are generated on Ethereum at the speed of 12 seconds, once per 12 seconds. The blocks are generated on Near with the speed of once per zero 0.6 seconds. Like we cannot composably combine these things. But I can tell to everybody, especially to the blockchain developers, hey guys, we're living in general in the asynchronous world. Visa is not working synchronously. Swift is not working synchronously. Revolut, Robinhood, and many other applications, including all of the financial applications, they are working on top of the asynchronous world. And we, as the blockchain developers, we need to grow up and figure it out. Obviously, you can hide these things and make it a little bit more usable for all of the different developers who are building use cases on top of this. And intents are definitely helping with this thing. So, for example, imagine you're willing to buy a stock. Is the best place to buy like on the stock directly on the Ondas chain? And the answer here is no. The best place to buy stock is on the respective stock exchange. So you can create an intent to get a particular token and then wait for some time for some kind of solver or a market maker to figure out what is the most efficient way how to do this. And in this case, this market maker is going to go to the stock exchange, purchase at the most efficient, the deepest liquidity market, this stock, then it will take it, go to Onda, tokenize it, and deliver straight to your wallet. And from the standpoint of the user, this is exactly what he wants to do. He wants to get just this token for this particular stock, and he doesn't need to think about all of these complexities that are behind the thing. He doesn't need to go to a Uniswap clone that is working on the Ondas blockchain to purchase this within the slippage, blah blah blah, all of the different things. Let the system figure it out. You also don't, when you're working with your brokers, you also don't know how actually the stock exchanges are working. What is the APIs there and stuff like that. This is a natural thing. You are specifying what you would like to get, and then something is getting executed. So yes, intents are brilliant things closer to this composability, but the composability from the standpoint of the like Ethereum as a synchronous execution of transactions, well, this probably is not going to happen anytime soon, and up until like the world is going to be eaten by Solana working on the mainframes, and hopefully this is not going to happen. But even if this happens, Near Intents already integrated Solana, so if you want to trade Solana tokens, you can do it directly on Near Intents.
I think it's more likely our robot friend eats the world before Solana. That's my last question, Alex, is like, what do we do when these things are ubiquitous? What kind of property rights should this robot have? Like, how do we incorporate? Oh, he's turning around. He hears us. He's listening, right? Because this one's for him. How do we bring humanoid robots into intent? Like, what role does AI and robotics play in intent?
Yeah, so this is a very, very good question. I do believe that we are at this stage of the fight for the agentic commerce in between the centralized, the fight, in between the traditional world systems and blockchain. I do believe that the most straightforward and the greatest application of blockchain for the AI is actually enable financial rates, so like agentic finance, right? And the reason for this is very simple. This guy would never ever pass the KYC of Binance. But this guy, somewhere inside, can have a small chip where there is his private key. Actually, all of our mobile phones already have a chip with different private keys. And that's great. You even don't need to have Ledger for it. So it is very easy to have a key, which means that onboarding this guy to the blockchain and let him transact when he wants to do this is a straightforward and very simple way. And I do believe that crypto and blockchain technology is very, very ahead of traditional finance here. And enabling agentic commerce is one of the primarily use cases that crypto can fight for with Wall Street. That said, we're much smaller than Wall Street, and they are going to fight back to us very, very hard. However, building more open world, banking the unbanked, giving more opportunity for everybody on Earth, including guys like him, is a proper way to do. I think that this is more justifiable future. This is a better version of the future that I would like to live in. And that's why I do believe that, especially for agentic commerce, everything that we're building is a straightforward and a very important application. We have quite a lot of features that are in development. Some of them are going to be announced just next week on NearCon. I'm inviting everybody to come to NearCon in SF, Monday and Tuesday next week. So some of them are going to be announced, but there are even more and more of these on this intersection of AI and intents. And the important piece here is that your financial data is extremely private, right? So we're getting into the privacy here. And if you will take closer look into what Near is building on the AI stuff, it's all about privacy. Decentralized confidential machine learning, private AI, private memory, like private chat. Everything is about privacy. I would not want to share my financial data with OpenAI or Anthropic, or even some Chinese models that are run by OpenRouter, right? So I just don't want to do this. That's why I want this to be private, and Near is building the infrastructure with Near AI that is going to be directly applicable to advanced financial use cases that Near Intents started off.
Incredible. Well, look at the time. Near Intents just crossed 20 billion. So, Alex, thank you so much, man. It was always a pleasure. Missed your cat, but this time we got the robot. Yeah, give it up. This is Alex Shevchenko.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good day.
Kendall Cole, the CEO and co-founder of Proximity Labs, today to talk about stablecoins, cross-chain payments, generally kind of how intents are playing a role in the space that we are more excited about. We're calling it neo finance, really this convergence of legacy finance and DeFi. Let's give Kendall a warm welcome to the stage.
Great to be here. Thanks
How are you, buddy?
Thanks for setting this up.
Yeah, man. Stablecoins, huh?
Stablecoins.
It's about the only thing in crypto that has a positive perception these days, isn't it?
Yeah, I think weirdly that does seem to be the case.
Yeah, well, what's going on here? Well, you guys have just recently launched a stablecoin kind of transfer protocol. But before we get into that, maybe just give us a bit of a lay of the land from your perspective as to the evolution of Proximity Labs, your company, as well as just generally how you guys have looked at the space at large and kind of the core trends that you guys are seeing now, investing in and betting your kind of company on.
Yeah, great question. I mean, so we've been contributors to the Near ecosystem for the entirety of our existence. As you know, anyone who's been following Near's journey knows, basically there's been a lot of exploration that's happened over the years. And you know, I think as this name of this event kind of entails, like definitely one of the areas that we are super excited about is Near Intents and what that's offering. And that started with mainly, you know, cross-chain swaps and basically unlocking these gigantic pockets of liquidity that existed in ecosystems like Zcash and Ripple and Stellar and others. But now actually we've, you know, expanded to just trying to support basically bring liquidity to all of the different assets that people are excited about and people are interested in getting exposure to. And as we kind of kicked it off with, like stablecoins is like one of the key areas there. So Proximity's goal, this whole time has basically been to just kind of further the Near ecosystem and kind of identify areas where we can actually just like have as much of an impact in sort of, helping these teams like bring products to market and, really deliver the best possible experience for any users that are touching Near related products. And so fast forward to today, and, as Near Intense was starting to get a lot of traction and volume, liquidity starts, generating some revenue. One of the things we recognize is that there's all these new stablecoins that are starting to come online, and we don't actually have a great way to sort of help solvers like actually get access to liquidity for all these new stablecoins for a few reasons. One, because these stablecoins a lot of times are not listed on centralized exchanges, primarily just because like due to the market structure, it's not very lucrative for a lot of participants to actually provide liquidity on order books on these centralized exchanges for these new stablecoins that a lot of people may not want or like. And then, in the on-chain chain world, things are a bit better. We've had Curve for years. Uniswap obviously does a ton of stablecoin volume now. And then newer projects like Fluid, who came up with more efficient models for a small number of stablecoins, started to do very well. But none of these systems really were designed in a world where we had, potentially dozens or even hundreds or thousands of stablecoins. And then, even while all of this was happening, we had a real landmark with, the Genius bill passing through Congress. And I think for the first time, what that actually unlocked is that we have a new class of stablecoin that is regulated and has, its backing like regulated. And that actually introduces a world where really under normal conditions, these stablecoins that are Genius compliant should actually trade one-to-one because they're effectively using, very similar or very tightly controlled collateral. Whereas before, when Curve was designed, like that was a world where USDC, DAI, and USDT might all diverge due to some kind of event because, it was a very different type of environment. So all of those things sort of happen together. And as part of it, we recognize like there's a real need to basically create a new category of infrastructure that's built for that world where we have a category of stable coins that should trade one-to-one under normal conditions. And also there might be thousands of them. And so that's what led us to building the stablecoin transfer protocol, which is what we announced a few weeks ago and are taking to market over the next couple of weeks and months.
So are you expecting like a Walmart stablecoin, a Starbucks stablecoin, like a JP Morgan stablecoin, or you expect like how much consolidation do you anticipate? What's your current mental model for post Genius Act? I think we get Clarity Act. Maybe my prediction is Q2. I think we're going to get it sometime April, May. Right, that should also unlock the gates for stablecoin providers to be able to hopefully pass yield back down to holders. Like in this expansion of stablecoins, how much, like what's your kind of current view of what to expect, right? So like for those in the audience, are we expecting new forms of payment across different commercial environments, custodians? How do you think about where that's going? And then let's get into STP.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think initially, and this is like whenever we have kind of a new toy for people to play with, I think everyone wants to try it, right? So I fully expect we're going to see every institution that can issue a stablecoin. And I think it's actually almost been a bit slower than people expect, but everyone needs to remember that like Genius is technically not really, it's passed, right? But it's not actually in effect yet. And so I think we're going to see the floodgates open as those like rules and regulations become like fully clear over the next 18 months. So yeah, I mean, all the companies you just mentioned have publicly announced stablecoins, or I guess Walmart not yet, but there's some rumors, right? I think we're going to see definitely every financial institution have some type of stablecoin product. And then, yeah, I expect actually the biggest change is that we're going to see any sort of company that wants to hold a user balance or actually just wants to reduce the friction of like, there's a user balance that's closer to their product and paying for their product is going to want to experiment with a stablecoin. And it'll be very interesting to see, which of those sticks and which of those don't. Like we might ultimately, I think we'll end up with a lot more over the next 3 to 5 years than we might have in 10 to 20. But yeah, we're going to see a lot.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. I actually saw a chart on X the other day that mapped out a example company's revenue on a recurring basis with a couple core assumptions about churn. And the key kind of breakthrough here was the slope of the graph of using a credit card provider, including a 3.5% fee or a 2% fee from like a Stripe, plus averaging out 4 to 5% of failed payments, taking out both of those, taking out the fees and taking out both of the failed payments. What you got was the slope of the revenue of that company was significantly higher than the company which kept credit card fees. And so like I think there's a very, very clear demand, which I think we're all excited about in this space, for stablecoins for actual businesses to use them as their rails. We also just saw Bridge recently got their OCC banking license. So all of this is happening. But as we talk about this, we kind of think about the same thing that happened with blockchains and with assets. We got this fragmented state of, do I really want to use my one stablecoin here that's accepted there and not be able to use it here? Doesn't make sense. How do we unify dozens and dozens of stablecoins into an easy experience? I want to go use my stablecoin online at a point of sale custodian. What's the back end required? What are you building to solve this fragmentation problem?
Yeah, great question. So I think the key there is actually that you need to make the assumption that you can easily just move the entirety of like a pool of capital between any of these stablecoins at a moment's notice. I think that's sort of the key design principle is like, we don't know what users are actually going to want or what the market's going to want, right? Like we have no idea what the mix of stablecoins is going to be in 12 months. We have no idea like what the demand for those different stablecoins is going to be. And I think it's actually going to change very rapidly. And so we need to design a system that's able to respond very rapidly. So kind of the core thesis, like the core design principle here was basically like, okay, we look at these pool-based systems, and I mean, I think the most efficient model that exists on chain today is Fluid, in my opinion, right? It's like Fluid recognized like, hey, the swap fees that are actually earned from stablecoins, like they've basically been competed down to like close to zero. So you cannot actually like really get liquidity providers to allocate capital to these pools in mass anymore, because like even with large volume, they're just not actually able to make that much money on those. And so there's just better places for them to deploy those stablecoins. And stablecoins are the most competitive asset to try to like get people to deploy into your system. So that idea made sense, but the problem is that it does not scale past a few stablecoins. I think they just support USDC, USDT right now. They can definitely add a couple of more, but it's going to fall apart pretty quickly because like they won't know what stablecoins users are wanting. And so unless like that liquidity had already been deposited by someone, it's not going to be able to be utilized. We wanted to come from the angle of like, we just want to be able to take like basically the entirety of that pool and convert it into whatever coins, like whatever stable coins the users actually need at that time. Because if we can deliver on that, if we can have a system with one pool of capital that can basically convert between any stable coins in its entirety at a moment's notice, then we can basically give developers the tools to abstract that experience of converting between stablecoins entirely away from the user, which is what should happen, right? Because like you said, users don't want to be like, oh, I've got Revolut stablecoin, but you've got Walmart stablecoin, and oh no, like that's insane, right? For them, they're just like, I have money and I want to pay and I want it to happen as rapidly as possible, because like that graph you mentioned is like, it's all about friction, right? Like you remove the friction as much as possible, good things happen for businesses, for users, for the economy, for everyone. So yeah, I mean, the core of SDP is basically that. It's like we have one pool of capital, and that pool of capital can actually be used in its entirety to be converted into initially any of the Genius compliant stablecoins. And the reason that piece is important, Genius compliant, is like the system assumes under most conditions that it's going to treat all of the stablecoins that are effectively whitelisted as one-to-one redeemable, right? So the lenders who are like depositing liquidity into this pool, like they need to be comfortable with that fact as well, right? And the reason we think they'll be comfortable with it is because we do now have this regulation that like actually should lead to those conditions being true. And like we'll need to have some kind of backstops for like really crazy scenarios that, could happen with like the treasury bull market or something like that. But under normal conditions, like this should actually work. So that's the core of it, is one pool of capital that can be converted into these different stablecoins. And then the second piece is, and this is where like near intent is a core part of kind of the design, is in order for that to be true, this means that solvers need to be able to ideally borrow the majority of that pool of capital also at a moment's notice. But they should only be able to do so if they have like a committed order from a user that they're fulfilling. And so like it effectively acts as though the collateral of the solver is the fact that they're running a specific set of solver code, which we verify using the T infrastructure that the Near system has been building over the last 2 years or so. And then they also need to present basically a signed order from a user. And so they can show like, I'm actually going to convert this capital for a specific reason into this new stablecoin, fill the order. You can see that like there's going to be some profit here that then ultimately makes its way back to the lenders. And so the TLDR and the cool part of the system is it can support any number of stablecoins as long as the solvers are able to get access to the issuers, which is becoming better and better. Like these issuers now actually have pretty good products for basically minting and redeeming stablecoins. Then we're going to be able to do this. The initial version of it is going to rely pretty heavily on a couple of centralized exchanges like Binance that have good liquidity for USDC, USDT. But we already have identified some venues for these market makers and solvers. They're going to be able to onboard so that they can actually access like all of the stable coins that users will want to get access to.
So, okay, so and then as far as your kind of business logic here, there should be very low slippage for stablecoin to stablecoin swaps within that pool. You should effectively be able to get one-to-one for all Genius compliant stablecoins. And we have a mental model that there's kind of two types now. There's Genius compliant and there's effectively yield bearing, kind of more, that could be algorithmic stablecoins. It could be ETH-backed stablecoins. It could be kind of like a mix of, private credit, long dated treasuries, short dated treasuries, a money market fund, kind of a whole kind of crock pot. So like very clearly a distinction here for Genius compliant only. And then you guys can do, I think, 1 to 3 bips is your fee on a swap from 1 mil to 10 mil. And that's kind of like the business logic here. Talk to us about like what's the growth story? Like if I'm an investor here, what's the stablecoin transfer protocol growth story? What are we forecasting from like a volume perspective as well as a revenue perspective?
Yeah, great question. So, I mean, the key numbers that we're sort of looking at as far as the market opportunity here, $300 billion, a little more than that, current stablecoin supply, heavily concentrated within the duopoly of USDC and USDT. What's exciting though, and what we're sort of banking on is like those two stablecoins are still growing, a little bit slower over recently, but like still growing, and yet the market size is growing even faster. What that means is that we're seeing other issuers come in that are able to get some traction, right? USD1's gotten some traction, PYUSD's gotten some traction. Obviously, all the bridge stablecoins are like really exciting and frankly very new. And now they have the OC charter, I expect that to expand even more, right? And so we basically see like a lot of the estimates are showing like what $3.5 trillion by 2030 total stablecoin supply. So that's about a 10x. And then we're going to see, we're going to go from 10 issuers that matter, if that, to probably hundreds or even, more than that issuers that matter. So a lot more fragmentation, a lot larger supply is going to equal much larger growth in the actual like trading volume. So currently the like both on-chain and off-chain stablecoin trading volume is somewhere around like $5 to $10 billion a day. We expect that to at least 10x over the next 5 years, just like based on the growth of the supply and increasing fragmentation. So we expect the on-chain part of that story is closer to like $1 billion a day. So if that gets to like $10 billion a day, then you start to have like a really serious, sizable market, even just on-chain, that we're going to be able to tap into it. So the goal is actually making sure that STP and thus Near Intents, ultimately, like Near Intents will be the interface. STP is not a retail-facing product, right? It's like it's a liquidity product basically for Near Intents that makes Near Intents as a more retail-facing product the best place to trade stablecoins, both in size and also just get access to the unique stablecoins. And so basically, we expect that like we are going to be one of the first protocols that's going to be able to tap into all of these newly launched stablecoins, thus be able to pick up some of the volume, build a relationship with users, and like ideally get to. I'd say, if we're looking at $10 billion on chain, I'd be disappointed if Near Intents isn't doing 10% plus of that per day just in stablecoins.
And from the user perspective, do you expect this to be like a very gas fees or something that people do not like? Are we going to enter a world where stablecoin volumes are driving a ton of transaction volumes, but a lot of the fees are being subsidized? And like talk to us about how you anticipate user acquisition and subsidizing costs as it pertains to like the business oriented logic here.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I do think that we already see a world where like fees on every chain have gone down tremendously, right? For sure. The most shocking is ETH mainnet, right? It's like I still have the mental model from 2021 of like it's $100 for a Uniswap swap. It's actually more like a few cents, which is so. And then if you're using fast chains, it's like even a small fraction of a cent, right? So like I definitely think that we're in a world that's going to continue where the expectation for like the lay user is that there are going to be fees, but the fees are going to be more like a fee to deposit into like to do like a fast deposit into something. I don't know. Actually, I think that'll even go away to be frank, right? Like stablecoins kind of enable a world where you can deposit into Interactive Brokers on a Sunday at 2 a.m. and like it's not there's no weird fee they have to charge you in order to credit that balance. So yeah, probably we do end up in a world where like most users expect basically no fees. And so a lot of the value accrual for businesses is going to have to be outside of just charging a fee just on like moving money around, right? Which is, that'll be very interesting. That'll even be interesting for something like STP. I think that like, I think the 1 to 3 bip fee is defensible, especially in size and especially for like unique pairs, but probably not much more than that. And that's not a lot, right? So you do need a lot of volume in order for this to like really be, long-term sustainable.
Just kind of coming to a close, what's your most contrarian take about stablecoins or intents What is something that people continuously misconstrue or misunderstand about how this architecture works?
Yeah, I guess like there's still, I think, some holdouts on. So I don't know how contrarian this is, but I think there's some holdouts on like why do we need so many stablecoins? And I actually just think that like most businesses are going to want to be as close to like holding users' money as possible. And so and having their own stablecoin prevents them a lot of like benefits around like the design, the way they're able to like allocate the yield, whether that's giving it to users. Hopefully we'll see how Clarity turns out. Hopefully that works out. But even if not, right? Like even if like, you know, what they're going to be taking or what they give to like an issuing partner. So I actually just do think we're going to live in a world where like most institutions or businesses will at least consider launching stablecoin. It's definitely not going to make sense for like coffee shops or random, you know, small businesses to have their own stablecoin, right? Maybe not even a lot of like credit unions or like smaller banks. But I think there's going to be a lot more stablecoins than people expect. And that's why I'm so optimistic about the work that we're doing, is that I think that the only way that world is possible is if there's a frictionless experience and moving between them. And so I actually think that swapping between stablecoins will become itself a new payment rail. That's my like probably most out there sort of take, is like, you know, you've got ACH, you've got RTP, you've got Fed now, and you're going to have like swapping between stablecoins.
Kendall Cole, ladies and gentlemen, give it up for Kendall, the CEO, co-founder of Proximity Labs.
Thanks for having me, guys.
All right, guys, we're going to have Robbie introduce the next.
Going. So we've got Aurora, Managing Director and Global Head of Strategic Partnerships at G20. If you guys are on the next panel, feel free to slide to the stage. Sal. Welcome to Denver and Intense Day.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Absolutely. It's good to be here. Thanks for being here. Well, we're gonna fire up our first panel. You guys have seen we've got a couple fireside chats, and so this one is all about intent-driven markets. Feel free to build on each other. You know, we'll just kind of have a free-flowing conversation. Feel free to disagree with one another. It's always more fun that way. Well, I think a great place to start is actually. Alex and I were up here just a little bit earlier talking about, you know, centralized exchanges, decentralized exchanges. More of the flows are moving into decentralized markets. I made a joke about Hyperliquid. He said that's not so decentralized. Actually, Near Intense is quite a bit more decentralized. I'm curious how you guys are seeing the centralized exchange environment either grow or start to contract, given the rise of Hyperliquid and more decentralized venues, and generally how you're seeing this topography landscape, maybe how it's evolved over the last few months. Maybe Sal, we'll start with you, and you know we'll come back down the line.
Sure, I think you know there's a use case for centralized exchanges, and there's a use case and a user group for decentralized exchanges, and obviously there's becoming a use case now for Intents to be moving into the DeFi world too as well. I think from an intent standpoint, you're trying to combine the best of both worlds. In the DeFi aggregated world, you still see a lot of failed transactions. You see a lot of payment for gas fees, and the intents really eliminate a lot of that, which gives you that more assurity in the centralized institutional experience. So there's kind of a hybrid bridging to that effect. And so I think, you know, there's a big use case. There's a big landscape of people out there. There's the retail components. There are the early adopters. There's the more traditional conservative institutional players that want a regulatory landscape. So there's markets for each of them. And eventually we'll get to this regulatory clarity, and there'll be, I think, a hybrid of everything in essence.
Yeah, I'd like to sort of add to that. I think sort of one of the challenges obviously has been on the DeFi side where do you have that auditability and to be able to trace everything. And there's kind of going to be sort of some sort of guardrails, I think, to get to mass adoption. I think that's sort of a bit of the challenge at the moment. I definitely see some consolidation on the centralized exchange side though.
Sal, what are you seeing out there?
Yeah, I mean, this kind of plays into like the last 3 to 4 weeks, like the peak sentiment and events around what's happened with OpenClaw. And kind of like where we see this going on a kind of accelerated pace now is agentic commerce. And agents can't KYC on centralized exchanges. And generally speaking, you can't operate a centralized exchange in 2026 without KYC and AML programs in place. And so, you know, like the flow and the dynamics that you've seen in the shift from CeFi to DeFi to date has really been this organic adoption curve of retail and institutions over the past 2 years, starting to engage in DeFi more meaningfully, as I think you were talking about with Alex earlier today with Apollo and BlackRock. But as we move forward, it's like if you imagine a world where each of us are operating on top of multiple agents that sit behind us, they're not going to be transacting in a centralized context. And so I think we've hit this kind of tipping point towards the adoption curve, which the next 3 years will be defined by. And in that world, volume and flows and interactions in the DeFi context are going to be the basis and surface through which agents operate and interact. So I think this just continues and candidly accelerates much faster.
Guys, I know Sal works close with the Near team and has been exposed to AI, agentic commerce, kind of, and how it's progressing. But I'm curious in your capacity at G20, and then how you guys are seeing this evolve. Is this something that institutions and capital partners are really starting to wrap their head around? Are they just kind of dipping their toes in the water? How are you seeing institutions come into this agentic commerce space? How seriously are they taking it at this point?
Yeah, I mean, the problem is they've got a lot of legacy systems at the traditional institutions. They're all have a bit of FOMO, quite frankly, and trying to look at ways that they can integrate some of these agents and external providers into their existing parameters and guardrails. It's a bit of a work in progress, but they're all looking at it.
I mean, internally at Blockdaemon, we're absorbing a ton of AI, not just from a trading perspective, but just from efficiency perspective, right? In all aspects of our business. I kind of view the whole intense and agentic and capability and AI capability of kind of like back in the day, because I'm old enough to remember when an order went to an institutional trading desk and it would be, hey, I got to sell or buy 1 million of Amazon. I want to do it in this price range. I need to get it done in this particular time frame. I need to do it in these particular chunks because I don't want to move the markets. And oh, by the way, that million's not all going to you. It's going to about 5 other institutional trading desks. You could do all that now in an intent, in essence. That's basically what intent does with AI capabilities to it. You give it instructions of what you want to do in the time period, set the slippage parameters, set all these things. So that is really making us a ton more efficient and effective. And it's going to take time for big institutions to get used to that and integrate that in, both from an operational perspective and an execution perspective.
One comment to add on that, if I can, Aurora. So I totally agree with your point in terms of where enterprise stands in fully autonomous agent interactions. It's part of the reason why, outside the scope of this panel, Near recently launched Ironclaw, which provides some of the permissions and systems around confidentiality and verifiability that put controls around what's going on with things like OpenClaw. But on the intent side, I think there is a familiarity and degree of understanding and experience around what that type of interaction looks like and the friction that is solved for by intent expression and fulfillment in a solver system. And we are driving part of the go-to-market motion alongside a number of the folks at Defuse Labs and on the Near Foundation side in the institutional adoption curve of Near intents right now. And there is real traction, and I expect that the 12 billion or 15 billion Alex pointed to scales materially as we bring on the OMS, EMS landscape and some of the kind of SaaS and qualified custodian players into the Near intents ecosystem. So I agree on the agent point, but on the adoption curve for Near intents, specifically in institutions, it's happening right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think with the intents, if there's also sort of certain guardrails in place, so whether that's restricted venues, settlement layers,
yes.
There's clear sort of parameters on what the intents can do within certain institutions, and that's where I think you'll get a lot more greater adoption.
You're spot on. From an institution perspective, I hate to say it, but you're going to have to need the AML, KYC. Firms are going to have to be whitelisted because they're going to want to trade and make sure the solvers have the liquidity necessary to solve the problem, in essence. But they're all going to have to be vetted for an institution to be adopted. So there are going to be these major guardrails for the institutions and regulatory clarity for them to come in. I think most of the traffic that we're seeing today is early adopters on the retail side for the most part. the institutions, as it pertains to intents and AI, are implementing it, but they'll come later on the trading side.
It feels like the technology has largely been solved. We can always get better on throughput and efficiency and these sorts of things. A lot of the innovation now happens at the regulatory level. This integration with BlackRock and Uniswap it needed securitized in the middle to make sure that it had a permissioned carve out. Would you guys agree regulatory innovation is maybe one of the most pertinent areas of focus here, or are there bigger blockers that we should be focusing on?
I think it's certainly a key bottleneck, and also cross jurisdiction as well, right? So every region, US kind of sets the benchmark, and once that's clearly defined, then others usually follow suit. But I think when you do get these early adopters, they help sort of frame sometimes the policy and regulatory environment as well.
And generally, how does that look on chain? If we're digging a little bit deeper into mechanicalistically the components there, how do we program compliance into an inherently permissionless system?
Yeah, so I totally agree with what you're saying on the regulatory innovation side, but the way I look at the existing intents architecture to meet institutional requirements and bring those flows into near intents today, it's largely taking the mosaic of existing AML compliance regulatory expectations, applying them in context of a solver, which is then KYB'd by the institutional counterparty so they know who's actually solving the intents or the network of solvers that they are interacting with. And then at the MPC chain signatures layer, we did a lot of work with an external law firm looking at existing MTL, MSB requirements around how the foundational infrastructure in the context of near intents fits outside of the expectations for these types of rules and regulations, and have gotten very comfortable that we're in a good place running an MPC node ourselves, driving the expansion of chain signatures infrastructure. So I think in order to solve kind of like what do institutions need for compliance to face off and push flow and volume through intents, it's almost less dependent on clarity specifically and more about how do we just apply the right counterparties for them to face off to within this system architecture so that they can get comfortable with their risk and compliance departments.
Anything to add?
Yeah, look, you're not going to get mass adoption and institutional adoption if you don't have regulatory clarity. Hard stop, in essence. It can be a nice niche thing that we talk about called technology innovation, but everything from the front end UI, UX, to the solvers, to the verification folks, to the other liquidity providers, all have to be AML KYC'd and verified. That's why, people still use Bloomberg terminals, right? And because they know when they're chatting in a Bloomberg terminal, those people on the other side, they're verified. They know that they're trading with somebody that is a known vented entity. And that's why a lot of stuff gets done on chat in Bloomberg. Same with ICE chat on the commodity side. You want to know who you're trading with. You want to know that they're good actors and they've been vetted and they're compliant and they have liquidity to do the other side of the trade. So that's where you're going to get mass adoption.
Yeah. Sal, I think this is a good question for you because you're not directly, working on near intents right now. From kind of an outsider perspective, but very familiar with it, looking in, would a permissioned near intents product where you can kind of KYC as a LP that, could service liquidity to some institutional flows, would there be demand for a adjacent product in this intent stack for that?
Yeah, the way I look at it is not like an adjacent product, but more so extensibility of the existing system architecture into a model where, say if I'm a counterparty like a qualified custodian and I have to KYB the counterparty that serves as a solver, G20 and Blockdaemon run solvers in the system, Sovereign wants to face off against those counterparties. I go through a peer-to-peer KYB process with each entity, and then I just simply whitelist who are the solvers that can actually solve my intent when I transact in the system. And so in doing so, there's slight technical components that need to be implemented, but 99% of the system as it exists right now is extensible to meet my requirements. It's just more about the process and procedures that I implement, and then ultimately the ability to specifically whitelist the counterparty that I face off to. And then you, generally speaking, get 80 to 90% of the way there on the compliance lift it takes to face off to near intents for a regulated institution.
And that way, permissionless flows and permission flows can kind of flow they can exist in the same place.
Exactly. And that's part of the magic and beauty of what near intents offers today is this liquidity surface aggregation. And I think if you had these bifurcated systems, you would have, less deep market, less market depth, shittier price discovery, like all these things that are negative externalities from bifurcating liquidity for different use cases. It's really just more about how do you put the pieces around the edges in such a way that you can serve both constituencies and their requirements.
Awesome. It's a very robust market out there. We're accustomed to Intents primarily servicing cross-chain, really bridging, which is probably the most vanilla, simplest way of expressing an intent. Given that we're seeing all sorts of institutional flows and RWA products, and these things are becoming a lot more expressive. If we're looking at the anatomy of intent, you got order flow, someone trying to express something, and then ultimately the delivery of that via the solver. Can we get more robust in terms of how we're expressing some of these products and these markets? When I'm thinking about, the path to intent-driven markets, we've got, a thin layer of some of the most basic foundational markets crossing between chains. But when we're trying to express multiple legs of trades and really build a robust position, how might that look from, the solver perspective?
Well, I think it's it's a function of whether the solver's acting as an agent. So for instance, it's got the best path for the institution or client, or whether it's acting as principal. So then it's got best X, MEV optimization. So it depends on also which the intent is doing.
Right now, you have to be an expert in all these functions, right? Or you're going to get taken in some capacity, right? You're not guaranteed best X, right? But you want to be guaranteed best X, and you need to be guaranteed best X. But unless you're an expert in the UI and the path and the parameters and the slippage and the time frame, there's too many steps along the way for you not to have a systematic best execution trade unless you're an expert. That's what we're trying to solve for in all this. In top of that, with including AI and LLM systems in top of that. So like the old institutional desk, I want to give it my parameters, and I want it to go do it for me, but it has to guarantee that the people are legitimate, the volume is there, the liquidity is there, and I'm also guaranteed best execution. My sister's not going to do this, but that's where we're trying to get to, for her to be able to place that order and know and guaranteed I'm going to get best X with legitimate liquidity vetted providers.
I guess one of the reasons why this question is framed in my mind is because the near intense user experience right now is unbelievably simple. It is input output, and when Demetrios, you were kind of describing the parameters here. I want to execute this much in this time frame with this much slippage, these blocks, these counterparties. I don't see all of those parameters and that customizability on the front end. And so are you guys saying that right now the technology exists, we're just not exposing all of that optionality to the end user out of simplicity reasons?
Yeah, I mean, that 95% of the integrations that exist right now are through the one-click API, which is effectively an API-driven abstraction layer that removes all of this complexity away from the user, so that when an aggregator or wallet product is implementing near intents, it's a super simple user experience. I want to swap native Bitcoin for native Solana in a best X capacity, let solvers go compete, give me the best price discovery on that, execute the trade, have full settlement and confirmation of finality based on the dependency chains. In the example that Alex was describing, 12 seconds on ETH, 1.6 on near mainnet. And so part of this is just in the spirit of chain abstraction and what Near's gone after for a long time, expressing that in the near intense product stack. But behind the scenes, there are these levels that you can configure and design how, for an institution who wants to KYB or pursue as a principal a best execution requirement set, to actually implement that in intents.
Yeah, I think good point. And that's when you potentially have additional tagging, right? So compliance tagging, the KYC, so there'll be defined parameters within these buckets of institutions, and then no one else will be trading within that except for these institutions.
And so how much of the order flow, I mean, you mentioned 95% of the integrations, but are any institutions currently using some of these behind the scenes parameters?
I'm going to be thoughtful because next week's NearCon and there's a lot of announcements coming at NearCon, and I don't want to steal anyone's thunder.
That's bullish. Right. Well, I anticipate that we're going to see a lot more of it, even if irregardless of how much of it is already happening. Okay, and Sal, you also mentioned something earlier that kind of piqued my interest, which is that we may have multiple agents operating on our behalf. I think it's much easier to kind of think about and picture, the vision that you described, Demetrios, which was like, I call it my broker. It's kind of a one-to-one relationship rather than a many agent to maybe some counterparty relationship. How might this shift the markets? Like, are we going to be going and looking at best execution all across so many more sources? Just generally, as kind of shifting this conversation back to agentic finance and economy a little bit, how are you guys preparing for this inevitability?
Yeah, so maybe like the way I think about this is in the context of like what you've seen. Maybe we followed the Trav AI announcement in the travel booking space, where the requirements that we're talking about for best execution and an institutional adoption curve of near intents are specific regulatory requirements that are placed on principal firms operating on behalf of clients. When we look at this agentic commerce expression of intent, it's more of like, what do you want done on what time frame and how do you want that done? And then allow your agent to express that intention on your behalf, and do that in the most seamless way possible to the user. So that may be something like book my flight and have this hotel arranged for me, prepare my travel itinerary. I want to be a human in the loop, yes or no, thumbs up, book it, send me confirmations, schedule my calendar out, things that are happening right now in the OpenClaw, IronClaw world, that are the expression of these two components coming together, which is, how do we leverage agents in a meaningful capacity with a seamless experience for them to transact across both fiat traditional context as well as on-chain environments as well?
Anything to add as far as any particulars as far as how you're preparing for AI agents to incorporate more of these flows?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's, to your point, there's more adoption across other platform layers now for the end user. So, from bookings to really itemizing the whole schedules now can be done automatically with a couple of prompts, and then the agent will run everything. So I think on a from trading perspective as well, this is going to be more optimizing on pricing and how trading firms operate across the board.
And at Blockdaemon, we're doing it in a number of ways. Obviously, participating within the network and solvers, but getting our infrastructure prepared, our wallets, MPC technology prepared, and our DeFi infrastructure prepared to integrate near intents, possibly other intents, to provide this technology for the institutions and the trading firms and other wallet providers that want to integrate this into their platform. So we've already built out a lot of that infrastructure and providing that to folks in the industry today.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a whole tangent we can go on with prediction markets and how intents could service these too. The last question I have for you guys is essentially around value accrual. We've laid out kind of the anatomy of an intent. It originates with order flow. Those who own the customer relationship and are further up the order flow stack ultimately kind of set the price for everything that comes downstream of that. And then as you get closer to bare metal, ultimately winning that order flow and solving those intents, you're going to end up taking some sort of spread, but that seems to get squeezed, right? As there's more competition in the solver ecosystem. How have you seen this evolve as intents have become ubiquitous as market standard, more solvers come in? Do you guys see that fee compression, and how are you reacting to it?
Well, that's market efficiency right there, right? When you start getting the spreads compressed, it means you are getting more adoption, and things are working nicely. So it's just a part of, I think, a good working market when you start getting this compressed. Obviously not good for maybe some of the ones that used to get a little bit more from it, but I think it's a sign of getting this additional adoption now and traction.
You want to see tight spreads, right? You do that because the liquidity is there, the efficiency is there. When you see spreads that are big, about you could drive 10 semis through side by side, you know that there's no liquidity there. It trades inefficiently and there's other stuff going on, right? So how we're protecting ourselves at Blockdaemon is every part of our stack, whether it's node infrastructure, staking infrastructure, wallet, and or the DeFi infrastructure, we have all that solved for the efficiencies across all four of those stacks.
Incredible. Guys, give it up for our panelists. Absolute pleasure, guys. Thanks so much.
Thanks for having me, man.
With Cow Swap. Please give him a round of applause and come to stage. Alrighty, gentlemen, welcome to the stage. Today's panel is called Aggregators, Routing, and the Battle for Best Execution. Super brief intro so far, and any thoughts about ETHDenver this year? Philipp.
I mean, for me at the conference, always the same hotel lobbies, hotel lobbies, hotel lobbies. So no impression of the conference yet.
Yeah, I'm finding side events particularly interesting this year. Been at the conference this morning, but side events so far brought quite a lot of interesting topics like this one. So that's good.
Michael Mogren from SwapKit, and yeah, I think the bear market conferences are always the most interesting because you find out who the real builders are and who's really in it for the long run and not just here for the hype cycles. So glad to be here.
Yeah. All right, gentlemen. Today's aggregators, routing, and the battle for best execution. I think over the last couple of years, as we've expanded much more into the multi-chain dynamic, there's been a lot of argument and controversial takes about where it is most important to focus on for blockchains, for aggregators, for service providers, and just kind of generally what users want. I'd like to get a bit of a debate going here, if possible. Is there a sense of where you guys see the utmost importance in this stack? Is it execution as far as speed? Is it low cost? Is it the ability to connect as many chains as possible with extensibility? How do you guys think about what is the most important part of this kind of cross-chain stack as it has evolved over the last couple of years?
So since DeFi is implemented in over 800 applications of any kind, we see all the use cases essentially. And the answer is there is no specific answer. All of this is needed, right? An institutional trading desk has different demands than MetaMask, and MetaMask has again a different demand than a Binance Web Wallet. I'll give you an example. Binance Web Wallet, they are onboarding their centralized exchange users to the non-custodial wallet. So these users are coming from a centralized user experience. So logically, Binance wants to keep up that UX as much as possible. So Binance really cares about latency, cuts off third parties at 300 milliseconds, right? But then again, for MetaMask, they're like, well, we want to have as much of a spread as possible, want to increase their own margin. So they're like, we can wait for a second to get a quote and do that. But then again, MetaMask has so much distribution power already that they need to be on new chains day one, right? So for them, multi-chain availability in general just is very important again. So there's no clear answer. All of that has space and room. And then for Ledger, again, someone that managed so many whales, they profit from a bridge like Near-Intents, which is able to dive deeper into BTC, Zcash, all of that. The whales have been storing for many years and never touched, right? So yeah, there's room for everything.
Yeah, I mean, traditionally for CowSwap, we have always focused quite a lot on, let's say, execution quality and price, basically, right, as the best outcome possible for users. But I tend to agree, like, there are other factors that are important. Now we are betting quite a lot of cross-chain ourselves. Let's say that on speed, we normally take the whole block time, right, in order to ensure that we give the best possible outcome. But yeah, I think it's every user potentially has its own preference right here. So
Yeah, I wish there was one simple answer, but I would say assets, price, speed. And we talk a lot about like chain abstraction or being chain agnostic. We can't really do that if we don't get really creative on the tech stack, because something like Bitcoin is going to have a 10 to 50 minute block times versus other blockchains where you have 10, 12 seconds or faster. And until we can get rid of those problems, I think it's going to be really difficult for us to bite into the centralized exchange volume. And we also have to offer the products that they offer. So we need things like perps, limit orders, all that good stuff.
Yeah, so just coming back to you, Michael, when it comes to under an assumption of equal slippage, equal outcome, how much should a user care for trying to swap one asset for another about the actual path versus the outcome? How much do you guys kind of emphasize the path versus just getting the user the actual outcome that they want, and how much should we care?
Well, I don't think the user should have to think about it. I don't think they should care, but I think our job building good products is to care about how the technology works and to make sure that it's sufficiently decentralized, that the guardrails are in place so that we're not going to have a black swan event, right? The bigger we grow, we have hundreds of millions in swaps every week going through our protocols. We really can't afford an event where, oh wait, all the swaps in flight disappeared, or this one protocol blew up. So, we really have to be careful about how we build that stuff. But for the user, I think they shouldn't even have to think about it.
Philipp, you guys are very execution driven to get the best possible price across cross-chain swaps in general, as well as your new Composer product offering more orchestration for more kind of complex transactions. How does this dynamic operate now with regards to intents? How much are you using intents underneath the hood versus more kind of mint and burn bridge or other kind of bridge dynamics? What amount of your transaction volume is powered by intents in general?
So in general, when we talk about intents, people like to confuse a few things. So there is the intent flow, which is like the general idea of the user not signing a specific transaction order, or like call data, but just I have the intention to swap A for B. I don't care how that happens. That allows anything underneath, may it be an aggregator, may it be a bridge, or just a swapping interface, to execute transactions more reliably, because they could technically use fallback solutions, retry, whatever. They somehow have to fulfill that intent, and then they can go different ways, right? Like, and with LeFi having aggregated so many solutions, that gives us a lot of freedom to guarantee better transaction delivery, so to say. Then there is intent systems, which are actually marketplaces. They operate by taking an intent, which is essentially just the flow, but then there's a solver marketplace behind. Well, we see lots of protocols have been going that direction. I think Kauso was one of the leaders from the get-go, one of the earliest people. And actually, Kauso has one of the most active and vibrant solver community. Almost no one else has been able to copy that diversity in solvers. Not a Near, not a Relay, not an Across. They're all running their own centralized stack, filling at least 80% of the requests themselves. So there's an intent flow, but there's not actually a network behind. That being said, we have most of these solutions aggregated. So we take intents and then we pass them on to other intent flow oriented systems. So the majority today is intents. Sorry, complex answer, but
Jacopo, on the CowSwap side, right, there's been a big shift of bringing different types of new assets on chain, right? We actually recently saw Securitize brought Buildle onto Uniswap, and we've seen money market funds, T-bills, stable coins. How does CowSwaps fill or kill kind of intent-based execution based on batch auctions? How does that change when it's not just crypto assets, but more tokenized assets, tokenized equities, things like Ondo's equities on chain? Does it change? And what does that actually look like from an adoption perspective for CowSwap to bring your batch auction technology, not just for crypto assets, but for these more kind of tokenized off-chain assets as a new primitive?
Yeah, well, I would say, first of all, like, let's say that Cow protocol is the settlement layer, right, for these tokenized stocks. The intent-based and the solver competition that we bring is kind of the same in terms of how that works. Let's say that there is an important, difference here, maybe compared also to the typical root-based infrastructure, right? In root-based, you basically decide a specific path that looked the best path possible at quote time. And then what happens is that if after quote time you have things that change, because conditions might change, then the user ends up bearing the execution risk, right? And this is true for any asset that you're trading. With intent-based trading and solver competition, what happens is you're not talking about a specific path. You're just basically saying, okay, I have this intent. I want to do this swap. And in order to do this swap, I want to get a minimum price. And what happens is solvers compete to basically give you this minimum price, right? And so the whole execution risk is shifted from users to solvers, basically, right? And I would say this is true for any type of trading, including tokenized stocks, right? So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we are definitely most interested in kind of this intersection currently with our research, with our content, and we found that there's kind of this ongoing trend, and your ex-lead investor, Mr. Samani, tweeted this, that RWA looping is actually this very, very exciting kind of next stage for on-chain protocols. And a lot of this is going to be with, has to do with what we're talking about now. Curious kind of like how you guys think about, hey, I'm an institution, I want to bring my assets on-chain, I want to bring them into Morpho, I want to loop them, I want to put them onto a different chain, do another set of transactions there, borrow against it, etc. These kind of more complex transactions with non-crypto assets. Again, more of these kind of tokenized off-chain assets. How does this execution and aggregation framework change from your perspective and for your business strategy as it pertains to non-crypto native assets coming on-chain? What does that actually look like from an aggregation execution perspective, right? There's different liquidity dynamics, there's different KYC dynamics, there's different user kind of slippage thing, right? There's a lot of new dynamics implemented here. How do you guys think about this from a first principles perspective as it pertains to execution aggregation?
So I think one thing we need at the top is a policy engine. The policy engine would, from the get-go, filter out which kind of liquidity sources is this transaction allowed to tap into, has it to be compliant or not. And then again, I think many of these tokenized assets are at the end of the ERC20s and or multi-chain native assets like OFTs, for example, or entities, ITS, CCTs, you name it. So from an aggregation perspective, there are not much changes. However, I do believe that we're going to see new standards coming up that are more aligned with FIX structures and things we know from TradFi. And also there will be standards around meta information on where stocks are coming from, how things have been collateralized, for example, when it comes to stablecoins. Stablecoins are also RWAs, right? So we put them in the same category. So we definitely have a dedicated team just around that, where we look specifically into how is all of this evolving. But I can say it's very early. Like also these banks and also these tokenizing companies like Ondo, they're still trying to figure it out. How are things supposed to look like? How do things become tradable and all of that?
Let me just add, I agree with Philipp here. For example, the KYC, right, is normally settled at wallet level, for example. So we have KYC solvers ourselves, but users don't have to KYC with Cow protocol, right? They KYC with MetaMask, for example, and then we are just, as I said, the settlement layer. So in that sense, the KYC issue is not really an issue that we have to worry about as long as we have KYC solvers.
And so kind of consensus being similar dynamics to a traditional ERC20, but potentially, slight differences, but more or less. Michael, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think things like zero knowledge KYC are really going to help out this move into RWAs. Being able to, have Uniswap style, DeFi contracts, but know that everyone interacting with that contract has, some sort of KYC behind them, even if they're accredited investors, things like that. As we bring in more institutions, more of these traditional markets, we have to figure out ways to replace the tooling that they have, right? So we can't forget about AML, we can't forget about OFAC, all that stuff needs to be covered, but I think we can do it in a more privacy-focused way, on-chain, more secure, more efficient. So that stuff is coming. There's a lot of people working on it, but like Philipp said, it's still being figured out, and there's a lot of different approaches, but I think that market is just going to be a huge opportunity. There's so many institutions, big players that have wanted to be in crypto. That's why we see these ETFs, but they want access to more, right? They want to be able to invest in companies, to trade other assets. So I think that's going to really explode the market.
kind of centering around this point in general with regards to this convergence of legacy finance and kind of DeFi primitives. How do you guys think about the emphasis and importance of cross-chain and of kind of generally this aggregation as we go from, okay, so we had a lot of these chains, we're kind of consolidating the chain landscape a bit. But if you recall, back when cross-chain kind of first started and we had, bridge to Polygon to go on Aave, and then you can bridge to your wormhole to Solana, and then we had all this asset kind of fragmentation. There's all these different forms of USDC. That's going to happen again because we're getting all these new tokenized assets on chain. And then again, all these different kind of standards for that. Also a bunch of stable coins. There's going to be a proliferation of the quantity of stable coins. So how do you guys think about kind of like reconsolidating again, this time not chains, this time more of an asset-centric approach?
Yeah, and this is exactly what we have been foreseeing. We're looking at exponential fragmentation, not only across chains and interoperability solutions, but also asset standards. And what comes next with chains becoming faster and cheaper, different types of AMMs and different types of order book style exchanges, like these things are coming too. So for LeFi, that's perfect. Like we have been building infrastructure to aggregate all of that at scale for the past 5 years. And yeah, it is the same kind of boring work of aggregating these things, matching these things. Obviously nowadays, LeFi already leans heavily into AI. So we're working on an AI-based routing that leverages all the data telemetry from the past 4 or 5 years. So there's a lot of experience and a lot of data we can leverage. So we're well prepared to address this, and we are doing this as of today already.
Yeah, I would say for cross-chain, the idea is always the same for CowSwap. So like we recently are launching on more and more chains, right? And we are trying to bet big on cross-chain. And the idea is you basically have only one transaction and you do everything with one transaction to maximize the user experience there. Of course, especially when you start dealing with different chains, right? The ideal world also for solvers, because it adds complexity also on the solvers level, especially if you start doing cross-chain swaps between EVM and non-EVM chains, right? Ideally, the great solution would be having some sort of chain abstraction so that the users don't really care on which chain their assets are. And I think this is true for every type of asset. And this way, this would make also the solver's life way easier and way more capital efficient too, right? So that's something that we are trying to focus on right now.
Michael, anything to add as we close out here?
Yeah, I think Intents has gone a long way to help solve that problem. So, if you're dealing with an asset like USDC, it doesn't matter which chain you want to withdraw on, right? You can swap it for whatever intents you want and then withdraw it on the chain of your choice. But I think that we're going to see a big explosion in different types of, on-chain markets for like Bitcoin style or curve style pools for Bitcoin, for example. So then you have Bitcoin across many blockchains. We're going to see things like Lightspark, Lightning Network getting more used so that, this process can be sped up. We're not waiting for slow block times. Ultimately, I think that it's still very early. There's going to be that fragmentation, and you're going to have to live with it for a little bit. But I think the tooling is stronger than ever. So we're much closer to that, promised land where users think about assets and not blockchains or technologies.
Ladies and gentlemen, give it up for your panelists today, Phil, Jacopo, and Michael. Thank you, guys. All right, guys, we'll be right back with our next set of panelists.
Handsome, it's okay. Guys, why don't we start off? We don't usually do intros, but we're near in the afternoon. Let's get the people fired up again. Why don't we do a quick round of intros, just a couple of sentences, then we'll get into the heat here.
Let's do it. Let me
Go
kick
for it.
off.
Yeah,
everybody. I'm Naman Kumar from Provable, actually, which is a labs arm of Elio. And we just launched the Shield wallet, which is the most private wallet in crypto. Sender is private, receiver is private, the amount is private, and the fee you pay for it is private. And so here at Tips to promote that and make sure it works well with Near.
Private. Nick, what's up?
Hey guys, it's Nick here from Trust Wallet. You probably might know us. We're pretty big, I guess, on the mobile side. We support over 120 chains. We're kind of known for that kind of stuff. Perps, predictions, swaps. We're kind of big there. Happy to be on this panel. I'm really excited to talk about what's next.
Awesome. Clayton?
I'm Clay, BD Director at Ledger. We're on 121 chains. But mostly focused on the hardware and consumer side. But anything with a new go-to-market initiative, I'm generally involved in.
I'm glad I got this panel. I was having a chat with the CIO of Bitwise, Matt Huang, the other day, and we were debating fat protocol thesis, fat application thesis. Ultimately, we settled on fat wallet thesis. And all of you here are working on wallets. And so, part of the idea there was where value would accrue, whether it would flow down to the ultimate, the underlying chain in terms of gas cost, or if it would be, at the application level as people were kind of going to these browsers. Ultimately, what we found was that as you own the end customer, you're able to set the price that everyone else is downstream of. The wallets are kind of the portal to which people view the chain, they're interacting, they're conducting transactions, they're doing these sorts of things. I'm curious how you guys think of value accrual. Is fat wallet thesis fair? Some of the, some mechanisms are starting to become embedded into wallets, on-ramps, off-ramps, swaps, exchanges. Some wallets are doing this more than others, but I'm just curious how you guys are thinking about value accrual and verticalization of the stack from a wallet perspective. Clayton, why don't we start with you? We'll move.
I think ultimately this industry is about value accruing more to the end user than industries of the past, right? So I think regardless of where you sit in the stack, that should be your ultimate goal. Obviously, you don't want anything to leak out of that, or be in a position to where you're kind of screwed and stuck dealing with other people who have better distribution or remote. At the same time, I think for people on this panel, all of us are collectively trying to be this everything app in a non-custodial way, which is interesting, right? It's I think we're in America. Most people have a Coinbase account. Most people trust Coinbase, but historically, centralized exchanges are still a place where people have gotten screwed over in the past. But really, if you want your product to be a feature complete product, and for us as a hardware wallet, right? It's we think of ourselves as the most secure solution for people to hold their assets, and that's historically what people have used us for. But then eventually, people start to transact, right? And swapping, staking, other functionalities we have embedded in our UIs. But I think for us, we can only be that secure product function if we continue to allow more exotic transactions to exist within the front ends that we run, to be the most secure front end in crypto that offers this non-custodial platform to do all these things, right? But anyone that can have an underlying differentiator in that regard, right? For us, it's security, and then be everything for everyone. I think that's the fat wallet thesis makes a lot of sense.
Nick, value accrual, and how are you thinking about verticalization, integrating on-ramps, off-ramps, swaps, the whole shebang?
Yeah, you see a lot of players today kind of taking that whole value accrual, right? So the vertical integration versus horizontal. I do think there are some key points in that. If you look at some other companies, maybe Ripple, for example, that kind of own the entire ecosystem, I don't think that's necessarily the best approach to building a huge user base, right? In regards to wallets, I kind of think about it like this: like, there's nobody sitting on a panel today talking about like which browser they use, whether it's like Chrome or Brave or something like that. I think wallets serve a very important kind of fundamental step for people to actually go on chain. Like we spoke about, some exchanges, whether in the US, Coinbase, or outside of the US, maybe Binance. I think people kind of refer to that more as a trading exposure, not necessarily a Web3 experience. Really, wallets are kind of serving as that whole experience for the end user, right? It might be the first time they connect to a D app, or they place a cross-chain swap, or even same chain, or maybe it's the first time they're staking. I think at the end of the day, like, there's a lot of wallets out there. They all kind of serve different niche purposes. I think it's important to have the key value props that are important to you as a user, right? Security, making sure your keys, your crypto, all of those good things. In terms of the whole vertical integration, I think it's nice when you have it. Like Apple, for example, you have an iPhone, you have a watch, you have the computer. It syncs very nice, right? I'm not going to lie. There are some wallets that are kind of doing the vertical integration, whether it be from the on-ramp to the KYC. So, eventually when KYC comes to trading, or, prediction markets, if you've seen maybe like Kalshi's announcement, I think it's a core feature that a lot of businesses have to take. Over at Trust Wallet, I think it's something we've been exploring, and it's kind of now at the phase where what are the key things we want to be the best in, and what do we want to make sure we prioritize for the future. And that's kind of the main question today, is kind of what is the biggest next play? If I had a crystal ball, I don't think I'd be on the stage today. I'd be on a nice beach house. But at the same time, we have to kind of, as an industry, decide what is going to be the focus, the narrative. Prediction markets, perps, those are gone. What's the next thing? I think that's kind of where we're talking the horizontal integration versus vertical. I think there's going to be a lot more of the acquisitions, and you're going to see a lot of these players kind of defined into smaller, big ones, as you're kind of seeing more of these acquisitions in the last 12 months, for example.
Mon.
How's it going? Very interesting perspectives. Start off with Shield is only on one chain Aleo, right? And part of the reason is because, hey, the team built Aleo, built Shield, but also is because Shield, like Aleo, can offer some unique features that no other chain can, like full privacy, right? And that's just not available anywhere else, so that's where we stick. And so what that means is, by default, we are vertically integrated, right? And so, like, we've actually gone out of our way to implement certain sort of services that the user doesn't even understand as we're working in the back end, but they make the UX just so much cleaner, so much smoother, so much faster, right? And I think you can do that, to your example about Apple and phones, you can do that when you're vertically integrated. You can't really do that if you're gonna be sort of the vanilla, right? Like if you're gonna serve many different chains or like many different user types, you kind of have to sort of do the most common denominator, and that's not always sort of the best experience for all users, right? And so we're kind of mindful of that. As for vertical integration, that's sort of our take on it. In terms of like, what wallet thesis, I'm totally aligned with that, right? Like, been building wallets for like 2 different sort of foundations/companies for the past little while, right? But I think maybe we look at this question like, okay, what happens in like 10 years, right? 15 years? And I mean, it's a buzzword that's been going around, but I don't know if I'm going to get some hate for it, but like neobank type stuff, right? Like where you have your wallet, it is your gateway into crypto as a user. And, we have swaps right now, and we have sort of bridging and sort of on-ramp, off-ramp, partly because people don't know who to trust, who not to trust. Trust is given to the wallet, and that trust extends to all services within the wallet. Number 2, well, how are wallets going to make money, right? You guys make money by hardware, and that's great, but like most software wallets, right, they kind of stuck to charging a fee of whatever swaps or on-ramps are, and so that's where revenue comes from. But I feel like, and that's today, but I think in the future, right, like, skipping a few steps here, but like, that's the place where you store value, that's your savings account. That's where you earn, right? Maybe that's where you spend money from through credit card, through paying your rent, whatever. But to me, sort of that's the future that I think, to me, that's a future that's inevitable. How do we get there? Are there steps in between? I'm sure, like, folks in this panel will figure out in the next couple of years.
Nick or Clayton, anything, Nick, you want to clap back?
I mean, everyone's entitled to their opinion. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah, I know where you're coming from, exactly.
Yeah. I totally appreciate that. I mean, at some point, you have different niches. We all have to kind of focus on what's important to us. Like, I was on a panel a few weeks ago with someone else from Ledger, and we were discussing like the barrier to entry, right? So when you have to purchase a hardware wallet, obviously there's an upfront cost. But if you look at maybe some of their holders, they might tend to hold a lot more on average, just because if you're buying a crypto wallet or, hardware device for a few $100, you're probably going to put more than a few $100 into whatever it is you're doing. If you're downloading a free mobile app, odds are it's left empty, or you might put $5 in it and you never open it again. I mean, these are realities of the world, right? It really depends on what you're trying to target and the end consumer. I think for us, our key mission is making sure that everyone has the opportunity and the freedom of reach. It's not necessarily about a barrier to entry. We try and keep that low. As a business, we do have to make money. So you will pay trading fees on an exchange anyways. So at the same point, like, what's your alternative? If you have a better one, please let me know, because I'd love to try it. But at the same time, I think as an industry, we will kind of move away from transactional fees at some point. Who knows? But I don't think I need another subscription. There's already too many, and I should cancel Netflix anyways.
Imagine the Robinhood model applied to blockchain transactions. You pay a $20 subscription fee, send as many transactions as you want.
Yeah, and then you just route the order flow of all the transactions on chain and just background them all. I mean, it is a feasible model. I mean, you certainly could. I don't think that's the best thing for the user, because nobody likes a front run or a background in a sandwich attack. If that's the way people want to move, I mean, we'll adapt, but I hope not.
Let me be clear. We should not do that. It's just crazy to think about. I've been kind of having a personal, like, internal identity crisis about how I feel with regards to self-custody. I think, as crypto becomes more ubiquitous, stable coins, and more high-quality assets come on chain, people don't want to lose their seed phrase. I still have money locked in a wallet from 2016. I have like 18 ETH that, I'd like it, right? But forgot the password. It's a whole nother story. We won't get into it. But, people don't want that reality. Like, they don't want to bear the burden of self-custody when we're thinking about, lay people and these sorts of things. People want a forgot password button. They want customer service. How do you guys grapple with self-custody in 2026?
I mean, we do have a forgot password button at Ledger. It's called Ledger Recover, right? But, ultimately for us, right, like we are, on the side of the spectrum that, we are always going to be at, right? Where it's like there is a group of people that will need this or want this. And, to your point about us having a barrier, we see ourselves as a premium product in the industry, right? It's like, if you want to trade, Bartcoin 69 with like $20 in a wallet, right? Like, you don't need a $60 to $100, $200 device. But if you want to be here for a while, and maybe you have ideals that require you to be non-custodial, or also you're intelligent enough to know how many attack vectors there are that exist in this industry, and like even more so now because of AI, then having a hardware secured wallet makes more and more sense every single day. But yeah, I mean, the old school storing your seed phrase, thing is annoying. There are paths to mitigate that.
Yeah. Could you just tell us a little bit about how Ledger Recovery works, like mechanicalistically? What are the things there? Do we have a trusted setup, or what? How are you able to kind of get the best of both worlds?
Basically, it's a trusted company that we work with that will secure the seed phrase, and then you would have to request to recover it.
So at the onset, you request that they have a backup.
You can purchase it after, right? But obviously, you would need to have your seed phrase for that.
To turn it on.
Yeah.
You can't do it after the fact. Yeah. I didn't mean to interrupt you if you wanted.
But yeah, I mean, I think you got our point. But yeah, the onboarding process for crypto today is annoying. But ultimately, right, you can start to derive like a lot more keys with that private key. So like if it becomes like something that you have to do once forever, then that onboarding process starts to look like pretty silly in terms of complaining about it. Compared to everyone and their mother who's attempted to vibe code over the past like month just to make a bot that like automates some of their messages even though they're not super important, right? It's like yeah, so I don't think the onboarding process is a problem in crypto, right? I mean, especially if even if you're looking at like gaming in the past, right? People say that the gaming failed because the onboarding was terrible, but like a shitload of people went on Axie Infinity to play a funny game for a while. It's just that like vertical actually isn't the reason why blockchain exists. I mean, maybe it can in the future, but like not now. So I don't think we have an onboarding problem. I think we have like a use case problem.
Yeah, from our side, we don't have the same service. We've been exploring it. It's a potential opportunity for us. We actually kind of take a different approach, right? So if you're an iOS user, iCloud backup, secure backup to the cloud, Android backup again, but you have to have a password pin, you have to remember that password. So it's kind of like a catch-22, I lost my seed phrase, okay, but do you have the password? It's one of those kind of issues. As a personal advice that I would give to people, even like friends, colleagues, like I think the best advice I can give you is don't put all your eggs in one basket. Even though I do work for Trust Wallet, I am a user of the product. I don't put all of my money in Trust Wallet, believe it or not. I use a variety of products, centralized exchanges and wallets. I kind of like to just keep it 50-50 between centralized self-custody and just kind of mix it up there. So I do have a Ledger, Trust Wallet, MetaMask, all of the apps. I have a bunch of centralized exchanges. I think it's about minimizing your risk as a user, which I know most people aren't probably that crazy and they don't need 15 accounts like me. It's a lot to manage, I'm not gonna lie. But at the same time, there's a bit of a fear factor, especially when you're moving to self-custody, right? Because again, you lose those 12, 24 words and there goes all your money. Like I had a friend who actually has a Ledger, the device broke and he doesn't have the 12 words, so he's like out of Bitcoin. It happens. I have friends that have Trust Wallets that they lost their phone, they didn't back it up to the cloud, and hey, how can I get my money back? It hurts to see. Like nobody wants anyone to lose funds. Like it sucks. I mean, for the rest of people out there, I mean, less money that's moving, wonderful, but that's not something we want to look for, right? In terms of the best solution, if there was one today, I think we'd be having a way different panel. There is no great solution, so it's, again, everyone has to take affirmative action here. The best approach is limiting your risk, understanding your personal, risk profile, and having an opportunity to basically give the users the freedom of choice, whether they want to hold the keys themselves, they want to have multiple keys, they want to write it down on a piece of paper, store it in a bank vault, upload it to the cloud, whatever they need to do. I totally appreciate whatever it is. I think, again, my advice would just be don't put all your eggs in one basket. Don't sign random PDFs. So make sure you're being very careful out there. Keep a hybrid approach.
Naman,
Yeah.
why is self-custody important?
Yeah, no, I think it's actually very important, right? Like I think part of the reason people choose to hold crypto is because of the self-sovereign aspect of it, right? You could easily put on Coinbase, Binance, and whatever have you, but then, it's like if you don't hold the keys, do you really hold your crypto, right? You can sort of get banned almost any day, and funds frozen, and then you're kind of stuck, right? So I think that, as folks said, there's no good solution to it. I think Ledger is sort of the good solution for most people right now, and I think that's fair. To me, I think what becomes interesting, right? Like, I think we should keep going down that path, but I feel like the definition of, like how do we maintain sort of self-sovereignty in crypto with self-custody is expanding. Like right now, as long as we hold our keys, we feel comfort that, hey, these are all tokens. But we're okay sort of saying that when we move those tokens, it's transparent and everybody can see what I'm doing, and that's okay, right? A lot of people, to avoid that, a lot of people do what you just sort of said, like you'll sort of hot wallet with multiple wallets because you're sort of wary of people going to the box store and sort of, finding out who holds how much. And it seems like to be sort of hard to sort of offer a higher degree of self-sovereignty, you need your data to be private as well, right? And so the transfers, the metadata, all has to be private. And I think that's sort of going to be the next, expansion of, self-custody into sort of being fully self-sovereign.
I want to expand a little bit into emerging technologies, emerging markets. Given the pace of acceleration of AI, I anticipate we're going to see AI trading, AI agents. Everyone's trying to code a Polymarketer Kalshi AI bot that's going to make them rich and wealthy, never have to work. Everyone wants passive income. And then Naman, you also mentioned a lot of these neobank features. We're combining RWA products right alongside crypto products. You can see this already happening on centralized exchanges like Coinbase. You've got lending, prediction markets, trading, all in one interface. It feels like wallets are progressing towards a financial super app or a centralized exchange user interface. Do you guys think that's a good or a bad thing? Do you think that's a healthy progression for wallets, or should we keep these product offerings somewhat segmented? Generally, how are you preparing for AI trading acceleration?
Experience today and the concerns that people will always have, even if it's not crypto related, right? It's like, oh, net new website, like what is this? Yada yada yada. It's like, there's like a study recently where it's like 67% of people trust their banks and like 45% of people trust blockchain, right? It's like that's pretty bad for us when we've been like kind of like resting on this idea that like everyone hates banks, which is why we exist as an industry. And like ultimately, I think a part of that problem outside of just, narrative and, the volatility and stuff is the experience of crypto is you're scary, right? Like even if you're in the industry, right? So there is going to be some trust element associated with transacting from a front end perspective, right? Where it's like, regardless of what we say about like trustless systems, in my opinion, it's like trust minimized systems backed by reputable people or organizations or brands that you trust. And if we continue telling people that like you are your own bank and like it's up to you to figure it out, and like they keep getting screwed, like that percentage that I just mentioned is only going to get lower, right? So I think having a unified front end experience makes a lot of sense to mitigate some of the problems that we have. And then to the point of like trusting the banks, right? It's similar if like you're on Chase, right? It's like, you can buy stocks and like you can send a wire and like there's a variety of different things and like your credit card's enabled in that, right? So, obviously like, most people are not using a single financial app, but at least like you have this as your home base. And I would like to see wallets be that sort of experience, obviously in a much cooler crypto native fuck the bank sort of way. But I think it's necessary.
The thing is always like, can the innovators innovate quicker than the incumbents can build it themselves, right? Like I see, the wallets are continuing to progress almost towards like an online banking or centralized exchange user interface. The incumbents already have all of the brand recognition, the familiarity, they own the customer relationships with the masses. And so, can the innovators get distribution before the incumbents can build it themselves and innovate, right? And so that's always the balance, right? Are we going to see some wallets gain significant distribution to the extent where they can compete with the JP Morgan Chases and have a similar product? If there's a similar product stack there, we're going to have to compete on distribution. Where are you guys at on this? How important is, all of these? How are you guys preparing for AI and some of these neobank offerings?
I can start with that. I think it's a good question, right? Like, I think what's happening is that incumbents are realizing that, hey, crypto offers more efficiency in almost everything except regulatory arbitrage, so they should move towards that. They started moving towards it, right? But I mean, what that also means is that there's a lot of learning for them to do, and it's one of those things that I feel like the market has, like the efficient market pieces. I feel like that's what's going to play out, right? And in my mind, because startups, crypto company startups are able to move fast, they're probably going to be the ones to sort of plant that first flag, right? And I mean, I think we sort of see a bit of that happening with Coinbase. They evolved into the social app for the last 1 year, but they just sort of said, hey, we're done with social for now, right? Going back to trading. But what that really comes down to, they have an earned product. A lot of people just leave their funds in Coinbase, right? They have the Coinbase card. So, that sort of neobank sort of has been alive for a bit now, right? So I think like it is getting traction. And, it's one of those things that I think innovation wins, and I'm sort of biased towards startups. So to me, startups win because they can innovate fast towards sort of that, towards that sort of point of efficiency of sort of market forces, right? And that's the way sort of I look at it. And to your sort of question about are we prepared for things like agents and whatnot, that's a good question. I feel like crypto is more because AI agents work off of software, off of interfaces, APIs. I think crypto generally, blockchains are generally suited for AI agents, right? But at the same time, I mean, bringing it back a little bit to privacy, it's about when your state is private, how do you sort of execute autonomous agents or even intents, right? And so that's where I feel like wallets probably have to innovate a little bit and become more like policy engines versus just sort of, hey, I want, I want 10 ETH for all this, for the 100 sort of shitcoin I have, go find me 10 ETH, right? And then there's sort of no guardrails right now. But I feel like wallets, sort of the intermediate step for wallets, is to become that sort of policy engine that can control, sort of guide, that can essentially constrain autonomous agents and intents really of what's okay to do and what's not okay to do, right?
I will say that the only way a policy engine works for like the broader market, right? Going to the point of like all these people, attempting to code for the first time and, allowing them to connect to like all of their accounts, et cetera. You likely need some sort of hardware device with a secure element chip and like, a secure screen to sign those transactions, right? So, I mean, you could use like TEEs, which, would solve problems for some people, right? But for larger enterprise folks and people who are very, very aware that, everything that's happening right now is extremely experimental, like i.e. talking like a month, as opposed to like people talking about an experimental technology that's 5 years old, right? Like you probably want the utmost security now for any of that. And, a physical signing device becomes absolutely necessary until like, we start to give AI agents robotic arms, right? Like you can guarantee that you're going to be able to physically sign that personally.
So can we, before we judge whether or not, hardware is necessary for these things, let's just, for everyone listening, watching, what's the difference between a wallet and a policy engine?
That's a good question, right? Like, what does wallet do today? It does send, receive, and then we talk about it, but store, right? And when you sort of introduce intents, what that means is, oh, hey, wallet, like I said, right? Like I want 10 ETH and I have 100 of, I don't know, Fartcoin or whatever, not the right ratios, but go fill this. No matter how you do it, no matter what chain, no matter which account it comes from, what protocol you talk to, it doesn't really matter. Just go make this happen, right? But like, coming from a sort of privacy perspective, I want to keep that intent private. I want to keep execution private. I want that agent to only be able to see a certain token in my wallet and not others, right? And so that's what I mean by establishing guardrails and really sort of introducing policies into wallets, right? Because, and I mean, I come from a privacy perspective here, but like that applies to I think all wallets. Because when you have, for example, agents being controlled by Ledger or by Trust Wallet, you also want to have to give them guardrails, right? On what they're allowed to do and what they're not allowed to do.
My limited experience on Claude and OpenClaw and that kind of thing is like, you treat it as its own employee, you give it its own credentials, meaning I'm not going to give my OpenClaw instance access to my own wallet. I would give it its own wallet and let it do its thing on that. And then if I have another OpenClaw instance, I would spin up a wallet for it. So it only has context for its particular assets and its windows. Is that, I mean, just a word of advice on people setting up their OpenClaw instances and like how we should give them access to crypto.
No, I think that's a fair point, right? But to me, both worlds exist, right? Like even OpenClaw's wallet, you don't want, you can have multiple wallets, right? And that's a lot of sort of operation security that you have to go through. But at some point, as an early adopter, you're fine doing that. But if you want that product to sort of cross the chasm, go for from early adopter to sort of, I'm not going to say everyday user, but let's say the early majority user, right? You're going to have to make some improvements in UX, in sort of number of, remove some of the friction point. And in that, to me, there will be some kind of consolidation of wallets. Now, I'm not saying that, hey, give agents access to your personal wallet, right? But maybe you're going to have an agent wallet, and within that wallet, you want them to sort of be able to interact, use this token on this protocol and this token to access this Discord, and keep those guardrails for that agents within the context they've defined for them, right? So to me, like the policy argument still applies, especially if you want to sort of expand into the wider sort of market.
Yeah. Maybe extending the programmability of wallets.
Yeah, because even OpenClaw example is a great one, right? Like everybody's trying to run it. How the people that try to run it fail? How the people that, and when you succeed, you're like, oh, what do I do with this, right? And then when you do succeed with it, you're like, somebody's like, oh, I can access your private keys and I can do this to your computer. So there's so many different issues with it right now, but I think that's how technology is born, right? There are issues, but then you have to, it's like a whack-a-mole game, right? You fix one issue, you fix second issue, you fix third issue, eventually it's friction-free. And so I feel like that's what's going to happen with OpenCloud, but also the autonomous agents in crypto and wallets.
Yeah, and especially as we've got more chains, more assets, 15 accounts, Nick, on different centralized exchanges, decentralized services. Have you dabbled with AI?
How many accounts have you forgotten about? Let me start there. No, I'm seriously. Like,
sometimes
I
that's the best thing. You come back and there's still
I had to start using like a password manager just to keep track of my accounts. Like this was 2 years ago. You know what I mean? So this is not going to scale.
Yeah, I do have a spreadsheet like an Excel to track it all. But again, I'm not your normal user. The other weird thing I now have is like I get spammed on a lot of my wallets. Like people are spamming me with a bunch of stuff. Like so I have to create new wallets and move stuff around because I don't know why people are tracking me, but whatever it is. In regards to the AI and everything,
you should use Shield. Nobody can track you.
Yeah, exactly. I need to start using shielded transactions, but not every blockchain has that. It's kind of defeats the purpose. But anyways, going into the whole AI Claude bot and everything like that, I think like at the same point, like I don't think anyone would just say like, hey, random person I met in the street, here's my phone, like do whatever you think is good, and like let's act in my best interests. Like as much as I appreciate the idea that I think AI is going to save our lives, make it better, like today it is not secure. And if you're going online, you type in like, how do I make a Claude bot to make me $1 million? And they say, oh, here's a tutorial, copy this link and download this thing, and you're all good. Just give it all your keys and it's good. And you wake up tomorrow and everything's gone. Like 1 in 5 pages, I think, someone told me this statistic, like 1 in 5 pages for how to download Claude bot is a scam right now. So many people are capitalizing on this opportunity. So again, am I going to give an AI agent access to everything in my life, my personal information in my crypto wallet, my 15 crypto wallets? Probably not. I might dedicate a prepaid card with $100 on it and give it a wallet with $10 and say, go crazy, because it's a neat idea. I think we are a long ways from anything of that. And do I trust the AI overlords yet? Not today. Please don't kill me. But we're not at the Terminator level yet today.
You missed the robot we had in here with boxing gloves. That was pretty wild.
I walked around and I did see it. So I was nervous a little bit.
All right, guys, give it up for our panelists. Another great panel. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Cheers, guys. Thanks for that.
chain intent execution panel here. Last one of the day. We've got Luke of LayerZero and Jason of Relay. Guys, quick introduction and how's your week been here at ETHDenver so far? Luke.
Yeah, of course. Luke Labonte. I've been at LayerZero for about 3 years now, primarily leading the solutions architecture team now, focusing more on our value transfer, acquisition through Stargate, API products. So kind of working across the teams through that. It's fun through the acquisition. Not many people get to do it, but my week's been good. I actually flew in 2 hours ago, so we just got here, feeling good. But good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Hey, y'all, I'm Jason. I'm a co-founder of Relay. Relay is an intent-based interop protocol. We focus on payments-grade interop. So the way we think about it is basically consumer use cases where people care a lot about speed, price, and reliability. Week's been good. Just doing some dinners, doing some meetings, one-on-ones, that kind of stuff. So happy to be here. Seems like high spirits overall, which is good to see. Yeah.
Definitely. All right, gentlemen, kind of looking at the lens holistically, broadly here of the evolution of cross-chain. I mean, we've seen from, 2020-ish onwards, the explosion of tons of chains and tons of experimentation with bridge designs, whether it be mint and burn, intent-based, hub and spoke, all of these, right? And it seems like we've kind of keep coming back to intents. Now, today's Intents Day. Is it fair to say, and perhaps if there's a more nuanced take, is Intents the best that we've built for interop in crypto so far for this multi-chain world? Why or why not? Or what is the more nuanced take there?
I'll take this first. I think they're both needed, right? I think Intents solve something that is needed for a specific flow. So like retail flow, there's kind of a back and forth dialogue around like core ethos of like how you should build things, or how like the overall crypto, or build things from the beginning of like core principles, and like, is it like nation state resistant? Is it like immutable? Is it like, can I shut it down if the government came to me and be like, hey, shut this thing down, could you do it? Or could it just like operate in perpetuity, right? And so for us, like over the years, right, I think last 2 years specifically, users, mainly retail users, don't actually care, which is like, I think it's like not like a growing up moment, but it's more of just like a hard pill to swallow for like founders who like really have those core ethos. And I think with Intents, like it definitely does solve that chain abstraction ability to like, hey, I just want liquidity. I want to do the thing that I want to do with what I have, and I don't want to have to care about like a fragmented UX. And so for like speed and cost for retail flow, I think is proven that it's like the most optimal solution for users across a variety of different applications. And I think where messaging it goes hand in hand, in my opinion, because messaging is like the most capital efficient way to move money across chains, right? There's no better way to move infinite amount of money without having like being liquidity constrained across any number of chains. So like burn limit models have been proven to work for like institutional flow, a much larger value flow. For example, there's been a number of transactions, a handful of transactions across LayerZero that have been 300 million, 400 million, 800 million in one transaction for the price of gas, and settles in 2 minutes, right? And so that's like a step function better than like anything that exists in payment world. But I think Intents is also solving something like equally as important for maybe just a different type of user. So you're solving for institutional retail. And then on the Intent side, I think, I'll wrap this up, but on the Intent side, they also use messaging for rebalancing. So it's like they go almost hand in hand, where they both need each other really at the end of the day for settlement and like efficiency of systems.
Yeah, I mean, I think I completely agree. Like, we really think that there are two different layers of interop. There's basically core interop, which you can think of as like native chain bridges or native token bridges like OFTs. And then there's fast interop, which is where we operate, right? So this is like chain abstraction, being able to take finalization risk. And actually these things are complements, not competitors, right? Like there's cases where you could use either. And so maybe there's some things that, orders that we fill that LayerZero could fill. But we use LayerZero, right? So we use LayerZero to rebalance. We want assets to be able to move across chains quickly. And and we're serving a different use case, right? Like we serve users that want to take actions and have it feel like they're paying with a credit card, regardless of what they're doing on chain. I actually think there's a benefit for core interop in having this fast interop layer 2, which is, and we saw this over the last number of years. Without the fast interop layer, the core layer is getting pushed to maybe go too fast, right? So you have an OFT, you really want to be sure that you don't have a global risk of the origin chain transaction rolling back and you creating more token supply than there should be in the market. So when you have fast interop, it allows the core sort of more secure standard approaches to interop to actually do their job even better. So we're happy LayerZero customers, and we will continue to do that. And I think we really think about us more as focusing on the UX layer of money, which isn't just moving money between chains. Relay is basically any input to any output across chains with optional call, right? So basically it's not just moving value, it's a user is paying with MUSD on Linea and they actually want to buy an NFT on Base. Well, okay, we can make that happen and have it feel like a snap. And then we'll go, rebalance with an OFC at the end of the day.
And then, so when it comes to more of the payments use cases then, Jason, as it applies to stable coins for, any online business or point of sale, product, any merchant, how does the tech translate into more of a payments focused architecture? Not just me as an on-chain user wanting to do a cross-chain swap, more of can this thing scale to very, very high levels of payment expectations? How does that scale from the more, I guess, institutional, more kind of consumer grade use case, less cross-chain swap use case?
Yeah, it's a good question. We sometimes call Relay on-chain payments. And when we say that, what we really mean is just, cross-chain transaction execution to do anything on any chain. It's a little bit fuzzy when you also think about the payments vertical of the use cases of payments, which I think is starting to really come on chain. So in that world, I think there's a few things to point out. The first is that we see a world where users and merchants are not necessarily on the same chain. Now, sometimes they are, and a user might have USDC on Base and be paying for something on Base, and then you don't really need Relay there. There's some things that we can do, but then Base is the payment rail. If you want to go between chains, then you need something that's going to happen instantly. And so what we can do is say, someone's building a neobank that's on Mega ETH. They have stable coins on Mega ETH, but they want to show up somewhere and be able to pay wherever that merchant is accepting money. We can help facilitate that. I think the last thing I'll add is payments are not actually transfers on chain. Payments are oftentimes protocol deposits, right? So if you look at something like Coinbase Commerce, their commerce protocol, which is being used by Shopify, it's not like you're just transferring money to the merchant. You're actually doing a deposit into a protocol, and that protocol has all sorts of functions like voiding payments, doing refunds, all of these things, right? Because the reality is things like chargebacks are a feature, not a bug of traditional payment systems. And so there's actually a protocol layer of payments, right? And so we can actually help interact with those too. So I think what we're going to see is, the burden is kind of on us to enable retail users to have their tokens anywhere, have it be seamless, have them be able to pay. And I think we're going to start to see this more and more. Stablecoin backed cards are a really good first step here. We're starting to see a lot of new stuff with Ramp and corporate treasuries and things like that. So I think it's all moving in the right direction. It's going to take time to break some of these cycles and see what benefits we can provide users, but definitely feel like it's coming.
Yeah, Luke, from LayerZero perspective with regards to payments as well, even kind of looping in the recent launch of, or at least announcement of Zero, how is LayerZero positioning for what I think we can consider to be one of the strongest current use cases of crypto rails, which is stablecoin payments for businesses, lowering credit card costs, getting rid of chargeback costs, overall bringing more sustainable revenue to businesses on chain. How does LayerZero think about that?
Yeah, I think with Zero in general, and there's a payment zone. So Zero, for those who don't know, is an L1 that are that LayerZero in a lot of our research team have built out over the last 2 years, simply just to solve a problem, right? We saw forefront of chains launching in the last 3 years, and like we really just like weren't seeing the innovation growth happening or progressing as fast as we would like to see as far as finality. And I think that's like in part why Intents got so gained so much traction, is because the finality of the chains like wasn't improving at the speed in which like we thought it would. Where it's like, hey, if every chain is instant finality, why, like, what other way would you send money versus burn a mint? Like, it doesn't make sense. But then if these things like take 3 minutes, 2 minutes, like there's a gap there with payments when like, hey, I need this, like I need to settle this for my user in 2 seconds or 3 seconds, right? And so for us, we really like looked at that problem and we're like, how can we actually help solve that problem ourselves? And so what we did with Zero is like built a like high performance chain that really is target focused on financial markets. And there's a EVM zone, and there's atomicity zones that you can kind of do compute in parallel without actually like, it doesn't, block space isn't like capped or isn't constrained based off of the transaction volume. It actually like decreases, which is pretty interesting. But there's a payment zone, and we were basically like, hey, we need something that does the throughput of today of these legacy systems or traditional systems that exist today. Like there's nothing on chain that, or there's no environment today that could settle all of these as transactions like on a daily basis, right? It's not feasible. It's like a hard non-starter for them. And so we're like, how can we actually like build something, not just like, other applications that exist now, where it's like, well, I want to build something net new that doesn't exist, and this is the only place I can do it because it's the only requirements that give me the ability to do that. And so that's really like our premise behind whether it's the payment zone and like in working with a lot of our partners such as Tether, who made a strategic investment in LayerZero Labs, as well as kind of using our technology to move cross chain. And so really working with them to define kind of what this should look like, and as well as other partners on the fintech side of things that we work with, and then the capital market side, like, right, working with folks like Citadel, like, how should this work, right? How should this work in a system where it's atomic across every asset class, right? I want to be able to trade my assets, whether it's getting exposure to price of certain assets across finance and interact with my payments. Like, these systems should be atomic and they should be together. And that's really just the premise behind not just payments, but like financial, like just finance in general, is how we took the approach to Zero.
Yeah. And then Jason, similarly on your side, right, with the announcement of your chain, Relay chain, how do you think about kind of reinvigorating the hub and spoke model with the Relay chain being the hub again? I thought this model was broken in the past. It didn't work. Why try it again?
Yeah, I mean, I think for us, we, built a product where we were really focused on just like, how can we provide the UX that people need? And I think the reality was, we started running a solver in the market, and we really felt like the design of the systems that were in the space didn't meet the requirements of what we needed to do to run a high throughput solver, right? So I think the idea basically is, you look at some of the other systems and you say, well, I'm going to fill this order, but I'm not going to get my money back for 4 hours, right? Like, these are the types of things that we saw like running, one of the biggest solvers in the market. And so we basically ran Relay until we felt like we know what this needs to look like to serve like truly high throughput solving. And that's why we kind of, coalesced around this idea of launching the Relay chain. I think, again, like, we launched the chain. Maybe this came across in the announcement. I hope it did. For us, it's a piece of infrastructure. It's not like a generalized chain where we expect people to go deploy NFTs or like build markets on top of or anything like that. For us, it's really like, this is a proof point that what you're doing with Relay is trustless. It's decentralized. You can always get your money back. We're never going to be able to like, hold your funds or anything like that. And so we are building, for us, it's like UX or bust, right? Everything we're building on the technology side is in service of complete flexibility to build a API and a service that provides the type of experience that consumers need. And so that's why we did it this way, right? Like, I think you'll see us like just continue to make slow and steady progress on the chain to do this. And like, we definitely don't see it as like competitive with Zero or a bunch of the other chains that are kind of taking a more general and opinionated stance about having people kind of settle on them specifically. For us, it's like an application-specific chain that allows us to kind of have what we need to provide our users and our developers with the service that they're expecting.
So, Genta, as we kind of enter this newer era, we call it neo-finance. It's really this convergence point. Legacy finance and DeFi is coming together, right? We saw with Zero, Citadel, Arc, all the likes coming on chain. They contributed in some capacity to this, to your design choices, to the entire facilitation of that launch. And we're also now just seeing tokenized assets really grow. Things like equity perps, commodity perps, stable coins, obviously. A lot of these funds are coming on chain. People are getting excited about RWA looping. Obviously, payments is happening. One thing that I think is interesting about this conversation is that it's been rooted inside of the on-chain environment, but not necessarily the off-chain environment. Talk to us about how your strategy changes as it pertains to bringing off-chain assets on-chain, tokenized equities, CLOs, stable coins. What does that look like from your perspective, from a business strategy perspective, as well as meeting these firms where they are? Part of this panel title is privacy, something that we haven't quite talked about yet. Talk to us about your business strategy and the logic around this newer era of institutional capital, funds on-chain, and these types of off-chain assets, bringing them into your stack.
Yeah, from our perspective, like we started LayerZero, started as like general messaging. We thought like the messaging market was like vastly bigger, and we still do. It's just like not right now. I think, and it's largely just used for asset movement, and like how do you make these assets ultimately just programmable, and not just programmable in like an atomic environment, but programmable in an atomic feeling to the user across any environment. And so for us, like it's almost agnostic, and I think this is the beauty of blockchain, right? It's like you can tokenize any asset that you want. You can codify any rules of that specific asset, whether it's some type of fixed income product, whether it's a stable coin, right? Like, and there's many different like customized features that you can put in these smart contracts. And for us, it should all work the same, right? And so being able for all of these things to work the same across any environment and have just the atomicity for the user, where I can say, hey, I want to do this thing, and I want to sign once, pay once, and don't have to worry about it. And maybe it's like a multi-hop. Maybe I'm depositing into a vault, and I get my receipt token back to me, and I'm using that receipt token somewhere else to go like lend on Aave or something, right? All of that should feel atomic to the user. And I'm with Jason on this. Like we truly try to build, like make it seem like you're doing a single transaction on one environment when you're using LayerZero, right? Like abstract gas away, abstract all the complexity away. Because if you don't make it at the UX level easy enough, like you've lost. And so for us, to answer that question, we're like agnostic to the type of product, as long as they're all composable together. Like that's ultimately the goal, right? It's like how can we make every asset class composable together, and that's like truly the Lego box of finance. And I think that's kind of the beginning goal of what DeFi really is. And now we're just seeing more traditional assets come into being tokenized and have that programmability.
Yeah, I mean, I feel similarly about our product. Like, we focus both on-chain trading and payments as verticals that are coming on-chain. But the reality is, like, you really can just use Relay to do anything. Like from a technical perspective, I might describe Relay as a transaction execution protocol. Right? It's more like you pay on any chain, and you can execute an array of transactions on any network that you want instantly. Right? So that is like kind of the core technical architecture that lives inside of like the payment stack as well. I have a user on chain A who wants to pay a merchant on chain B. That lives inside of the trading flow of funds when a user has USDC on Solana and wants to buy a meme coin on Base. And so I think, we look at these verticals that are coming on chain and thinking about like how we can provide value-added services for them, how we can make sure our product really works for their needs. But I think for us, it's more like core infrastructure, right? Like we just think that chains should all sort of feel like one. And that might be partially supported by interop standards built into the tokens themselves, partially supported by intents. And I think there's a bunch of different reasons why those things are differentiated, not just speed. And And yeah, so like we're happy to see a burgeoning set of use cases really like come to fruition in blockchain. I think, you know, the reality is we haven't crossed the chasm. We're getting there. I think crypto is like, we're like somewhere leaping over the middle right now. And I think something that people forget is the users, like the early adopters of crypto, are not the same people as the majority that's coming next, right? So as an early adopter of crypto, I was more than happy to click some buttons on my screen, wait 10 minutes and like pray to God that my ETH came out on Arbitrum. Most people will not do that. And I think it's like, it's up to us to build a user experience that people tolerate. Like we're just so not there yet. And so I think like, it just feels like UX or bust. You know, we just got to get that part right.
Luke, from what can we expect from the go-to-market side of Zero this year? Or if not that, what's your priority for LayerZero?
Yeah, it's a load on the Zero side. It's a loaded question. My colleague Parker's there.
Parker?
Leads DeFi for us. He's great. I think it's exactly kind of what I said before, where maybe not exactly, but the primary focus is like, what does this unlock that can't be built anywhere else for Zero? And really just pushing the space forward, right? Like this should be the new benchmark for chains that are coming forward, right? It's that step function for blockchains in general to be able to handle real world like throughput needs at scale. And so for us, I think there's obviously the capital market side, there's the payment side, and there's like the general purpose EVM zone that's like existing things that are already built and come in and ultimately build and compose across those two zones together, so that you can actually work with the financial markets that are being built in those specific zones, whether it's payments, whether it's capital markets and trading. On the interop side, there's like still all one business for us. Like there's no differentiation in like our focus. We still are very like super focused on value transfer and like the rails in which we've laid. And like, I think that is all synergistic to Zero and like its launch. And like, hey, we've worked with these partners over the years and like built these relationships. And now we can help them kind of like expand into what we're ultimately incubating with Zero. So for us and for me particularly, I'm just focused on value transfer, right? Like Stargate acquisition was like the largest messaging-based bridge in the space. Like, how can we make that a better experience for users? What should we add to it? How can we embed other services within there? Like we have Vaults products, we have other things similar to what Jason's talking about. I think chain to chain is very much solved. We see it's like more app to app. So it's how can you make those composed actions within applications more seamless, and then build a consumer application that's like, to Jason's point, more usable to retail. And so that's really my focus from the consumer app side of Stargate, but also the API side of like how can we go distribute that.
Jason, for your chain, kind of what's the roadmap here? What's the focus on the go-to-market?
Yeah, I mean, I think on the chain side, like just to reiterate, like it's not something that you're going to see us pushing to end users, right? For us, it's like, what can the chain do to make our core API and product better? You know, Relay V3 is designed. We're working on that. I think you're going to see us roll out a bunch of cool stuff over the next year. I think we're taking a pretty different approach to a lot of the other intent-based systems. So excited to like see some of those pieces come to fruition. I think the other side for us again is like the missing pieces at the UX layer, right? So things like fee sponsorship, onboarding flows, how can you make it easier for users to check out and pay, and things like this that I think there's just like still some missing work there that I think we're super excited about. You know, you have all sorts of things like, you know, do new people coming into crypto want to connect their wallet everywhere they go, and things like that. So I think we're kind of like operating at two layers here, right? Like we don't build, you know, checkout experiences. We work with partners that do that. They still need like the on-chain infrastructure to make those things happen. And so I think like we're very much playing a supportive role there. And then kind of on the bottom side, working on the Relay protocol to make it faster, cheaper, more available routes, more chain support, right? All these pieces. So I think the short story is Relay will always be any input, any output optional call. And it's like, how do we make that as good as humanly possible?
Ladies and gentlemen, give it up for Luke and Jason, the final panel of the day. Woo! Here we go. Alrighty, guys. We will have Robbie back up to close out Intense Day. Guys, thank you for being here. At ETHDenver. Come here, bud.
You have fun?
That was a long day full of panels, firesides, discussions. Intense, man.
Intense indeed. I enjoy it. I learned. Yeah. We had a couple of spicy ones.
Yeah, I found myself bringing in a lot of the conversations back to the things that we're interested in.
Yeah.
Tokenization, the neo-finance kind of
A lot
talk,
of neo-finance,
payments, stable coins,
agentic payments.
it's all kind of coming together.
You know,
because I think like there's so much builder-oriented thought about like product, like trying to be like, hey, like here's what's happening, and like how does this product work in this environment, right?
Well, it's kind of our perspective that we were able to go out, bring in new perspectives, and hopefully inform a lot of the builders and help shape some of these products. And what are we seeing out there? Like we're seeing neo finance in terms of and it's kind of a double-edged sword. Like permission DeFi is something that's unsolved, and synchronous composability is something we're hearing about as well at ETHDenver. It's like it's people feel generally positive, BlackRock buying Uniswap and partnering and Apollo and Morpho, but there's complications, like there's intricacies to work out there.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think there's been a lot of progress on the tech side to supplant the broader institutional adoption.
I brought up self-custody on the wallets one.
No,
like,
I know.
How are people reacting
all
to
of these? And Jason just said, right, like this next set of users does not have the same properties or care as the previous. And I think that's something that like a lot of these companies are starting to realize. In addition to that, it's like, I was asking Kendall, like, all right, so we're launching this stablecoin transfer protocol based on near intents. What's what's your growth here? Like, what's the growth story from transaction volumes, revenue? Like, where's the business case here? Like, explaining, based on stablecoin growth, transactions on chain, off chain. I think it's important to ask every one of these people, like, what's your business here? Like where's your, like, how are you making money?
We're no longer relying on narrative and hype, and there's not a retail audience out there buying these tokens up that we can kind of pull the wool over their eyes and say, yeah, this big trend is going to continue to happen, so you got to get in now while it's still early. Like, you do have to have a real business model that's going to have product market fit, and
still early.
It is still early. One of the things that really signaled to me like this is still early was the Intense Market panel, which was, I mean, we went from $10 billion through near intents to like 15 or 20, at this point just here during the day. But at the Intent Markets panel, we had a couple of solvers and we had Sal from Sovereign basically talking about how right now these are just vanilla intents that are flowing, and Near was able to generate upwards of 15 billion in volume. Once we're seeing the institutional capital flows, RWA products, more high quality assets, like I was still under the impression that intents were just for, cross-chain, maybe cross-chain swaps because they can just deliver the asset. Yeah. No, there's all kinds of parameters, how much you want to sell, when you want to sell, what is your order block, what is your price conditions. All of this can be expressed in an intent, and you can structure all kinds of expressive products and trades as a result of that. So it's really a tool that's built for like expressive, robust market, but we're only using it for this very vanilla base case. Yeah. And even that vanilla base case has $15 billion of volume. Yeah,
I mean, I think that the newer capital markets participants are going to actually really jive with intents, because all it is market making.
Yeah.
Like if you can just explain intents in a single 2 words, it's market making. Mm-hmm. And so I think that that's something that like a lot of firms will get behind. Mm-hmm. And again, will they even need to know? I'm not sure. Now, I think
we're gonna have to speak we're gonna have to translate, communicate, so they understand the technology. Otherwise, they're just gonna go build it themselves because they don't think a solution out there exists.
Yeah.
But I think you're right. I think we're also in the position where we kind of talk to both sides, and so we're the job of a translator, right? And helping to open the eyes to some of these institutions. These technologies already exist. Don't do it yourself. You're gonna be spinning your wheels. You can partner or partner with some of these guys that have already invested a lot into this technology.
Yeah. I mean, I think all of this technology, I feel like Andreas onto Pelos right now in Bitcoin 2014. I'm telling you guys, they will use Intense. Intense will be used by the institutional capital allocators. Guys,
shout out Near.
It's been an amazing Intense day. Thank you so much for joining us live on Rollup TV, live in Denver. Guys, much love. Rock
See you at
on.
NearCon.
See you at NearCon next week. Thank you, guys.